The Ventura team informed Glenn that he was no longer part of their squad. Despite his skill in combat, Glenn's place had already been taken by another, equally capable warrior. Glenn had expected this to happen, but a sense of betrayal seared through his heart. He quickly realized that he had been kicked out of the team at the crucial moment when their adventures had finally reached B rank. From all indications, a new contender had been preparing to take his place for quite some time. The boy avoided any arguments, not wanting to deal with people who had lost his respect. During the celebration, the commander of the adventure squad slyly offered Glenn to keep all the equipment, supposedly as a memento of past achievements. But Glenn immediately saw through this ruse, because he had purchased all the things himself and deserved them by right. The protagonist asked to be allowed to meet with the new fighter who was to become his successor. The commander, hesitating only for a moment, allowed Glenn to formally transfer the position right now. He emphasized that he is convinced without a doubt. Glenn is a true martial artist, whose achievements are well known to him and truly impressive. Glenn was a little surprised to hear these words, but he kept his cool and brushed them off. All this was just gossip, he said. He suggested that the newcomer learn more about his future team. First of all, Glenn advised Rouse to buy good earplugs, a thing that is indispensable here. The rookie stopped in confusion, not expecting such a request from an experienced camper. Meanwhile, Glenn was clearly agitated by the rumors that still circulated about his character. Rouse recalled hearing rumors that Glenn often visited brothels and had a reputation for being a passionate admirer of local courtesans. Earth noticed that the guys from that team create a restless atmosphere wherever they go. That's why it's always a good idea to keep earplugs handy. This way you can protect yourself from the stream of meaningless conversations that pour out of their tent, especially when they're having fun. It's quite normal for them. He wondered in amazement how the team leader managed to manage 3 girls at once and find pleasure in it. To this, Glenn replied that the role of an extra was not easy for him. Constant loneliness and endless female sighs were driving him crazy, so he had to look for an outlet in the broth. The captain then brought up a topic that had long been on the minds of the entire crew, and warned the newcomer that many trials lay ahead of him. What he heard completely ruined Rose's mood, and he, full of confusion, could not understand how he had found himself in this incomprehensible situation. The leader of Guadu, tired of the prolonged conversation between Glenn and the stranger, strongly called for an end to this waste of time. Glenn himself was not eager to stay around, because according to him, everything necessary had already been done. The adventure of a newbie. "May you be lucky and have patience," he said in farewell. Meanwhile, the commander sternly announced that Glenn had been expelled from the team. However, Glenn, not at all embarrassed, only smiled mysteriously and promised he would certainly spare the moon. As he left the building, Glenn suddenly realized that his brief absence from the team had brought an unexpected benefit. He felt much lighter and felt a pleasant sense of relief. He had been an inseparable companion of this company of desperate men from his early years, and for 3 years they had walked side by side along their unknown paths. But later the exile remembered the money sent home and wondered if all was well in his native home. So he decided to see for himself how his family was doing. And it was then that he accidentally came across a creaking cart that Glenn had skillfully crafted. Glenn looked at the tree in surprise, and remembered how his comrades from the previous team had only managed to obtain a B rank, while he himself had obtained an A rank. Despite these differences, he had managed to skillfully hide it from the Adventurers Guild and not arouse suspicion. The past no longer had any power over Glenn. Everything connected with that team was left behind. Thinking about the future, the boy asked the driver how long their journey would take. Cocket only calmly warned it was worth being patient, because the journey would stretch for several days. Finally, tired of the endless rumble of the old carriage and the exhausting journey, Glenn reached his destination and moved on, conquering new horizons of his journey. Gorm grew up in this orphanage, which became his home for many years of his childhood. Now he faces a new stage, an adventure that will change everything. Looking around the park, he notices many other orphans who, like him, dream of their future. The priest and the director of the orphanage insisted that Glenn leave the city immediately, for the disturbing rumors that were already circulating in the district had caused them real fear. They believed that his presence here might even endanger the safety of the children, so they did not want Glenn under that roof. He was struck by such heartfelt hospitality. He couldn't help but wonder if frightening tales of his recent exploits had reached these parts. This inequality outraged the famous adventurer. The young man indignantly promised loudly never to appear within the walls of that church again. Then Glenn threw the purse of coins directly at the feet of the rector of the orphanage, and solemnly declared that this was his last contribution to this institution. The hero set off into the depths of the forest, determined to unleash his fury on the local beasts, who were instantly falling victim to his sword. The priest's words continued to echo in his head. How could he be so unjustly pushed aside? Suddenly, an excruciating pain shot through his arms, the mark of a powerful magical bolt that mercilessly tore through the air. The attack was the embodiment of wild rage and bitter disappointment. The unbearable pain grew, confidently exceeding the limits of any endurance. His head was squeezed as if in a vice, and at that moment, Glenn remembered how in his childhood and adult life, he had been repeatedly reproached for his weakness. The adventurer finally realized something bright and real had never appeared in his life, and a bitter feeling of resentment and discontent always weighed heavily on his soul. The child was often despised, called weak and stupid. These bitter insults were forever etched in his memory, leaving a deep mark and influencing the formation of his character. The older boys never missed an opportunity to mock Glenn, bringing him to tears. His tears only served as an excuse for even more cruel mockery, which drove the boy deeper and deeper into the abyss of despair. In the end, Glenn convinced himself that it was his difference that doomed him to loneliness. He sincerely wanted to change, so he eagerly immersed himself in reading books. Fortunately, there was no shortage of them on the shelves in the shelter. The first textbook he came across was a book on psycho-magic. In it, Glenn Lerth argued that lightning magic, directed at the brain, could affect both human character and memory. For the boy, whose soul burned with resentment, this discovery was a real shock. From then on, he had a firm intention to master this mysterious science at any cost. Lightning magic. Glenn directed powerful bolts of lightning directly into his own palm, then confidently raised his hand to his temple. There was no shadow of doubt in his eyes. He considered this simple trick to be absolutely simple to perform. The first steps towards changing his character were successful, although Glenn's frequent lonely walks to the garden created tension in the atmosphere of the orphanage. The nun was genuinely surprised and pleased that the boy finally stopped crying and began to fall asleep at least sometimes. He was sincerely happy with the new shades of his mood, and promised himself never to shed tears again. From now on, he was a completely different person. Exhausted, Glenn lay unconscious in a clearing among the forest thickets until he was found by the local fairies. Through the transparent flickering of his wings, these curious flying creatures immediately understood. It was impossible to leave the hero alone in this form. A predatory monster could be lurking in the surrounding thickets at any moment. However, the fairies looked at each other in confusion, because they had no idea how they could help the exhausted traveler. Appearing before everyone, the High Fairy approached Glenn first. She restrained the excitement of her subordinates and, appreciating the unusual guest, decided to lend a helping hand to this distinguished traveler. Fairy immediately felt that this time Glenn had clearly gone too far with magic, and the reason lay in the acute heartache of betrayal by loved ones. Memories of the first meeting with Glenn brought him back to his distant childhood, when he had watched Fairy's charming appearance with curiosity and delight, admiring his delicate movements and graceful manners. Even in childhood, Glenn knew true happiness when fate gave him an acquaintance with Fairy. The flying girl did not hide her surprise and admiration. She was so happy to meet a sincere, kind-hearted guy. Years passed, but even the majestic and powerful Fairy retained tender feelings for Glenn in her heart. She sincerely worried about him. Every time she saw how the young man was exhausted from internal experiences, Fairy understood immediately. The adventurer's mind had cracked, and the lights of pain were shining in his eyes. She could not allow Glenn to die so senselessly. The other fairies also wanted the same, because their hearts were full of love for him. Fairy Prim used her healing magic, sincerely wishing that this journey would continue, at least for herself and the other fairies. The healing magic worked exactly as expected. In a moment, Glam regained his strength and woke up after a short rest. Ventura had no idea where he was. He opened his eyes in an unfamiliar bed, far from the comfort of any home. The fairies did not hide their disappointment. They did not like his sudden consciousness. Coming closer, they surrounded him from different sides and with barely noticeable curiosity began to ask how he felt. Seeing the tiny winged fairies, he froze in amazement. Suddenly, old memories flashed in his head. Those creatures had already come across his eyes before. This discovery struck the traveler, because once he sought to erase from his memory everything connected with the past. Fairy emphasized that she was well aware of the feelings of confusion that gripped Glenn, and advised him to take a closer look at the world around him. The High Fairy warmly addressed the traveler, introducing herself as Frana. Blaine, overcome with confusion, could not understand what was happening around him. He, not yet recovered from his surprise, asked if he had accidentally ended up in some kind of night den during his unconsciousness. Hearing this, Frana awkwardly disappeared, hastening to assure this place was in no way a brothel. She admitted without hesitation how happy she was to meet Glenn. However, the adventurer, narrowing his eyes warily, asked, "Do we really know each other?" Carol told them that they had known each other for a long time, and at that moment, the High Fairy suddenly appeared in her old form, which she had had long ago. Glenn immediately remembered everything, and without wasting time, he asked if Frana was really the same fairy that he had met in the garden as a child. The girl nodded in confirmation. She admitted that Glennet had captured her heart from the very first moment they met, and later a magical pact was concluded between them, and since then she had been following all his adventures relentlessly. The High Fairy frankly told how she was captivated by his extraordinary appearance and almost irresistible charisma. Venturer wondered where fate had taken him. In response, the High Fairy told Glenn to look out the window, and then an amazing picture opened before him. He was in the very heart of the fairy kingdom. The girl told the traveler that he was the first to set foot on the land of this wonderful world. Glenn was seized with admiration and astonishment at the same time. He confessed that until now he had considered the fairy kingdom only a fiction, a fairy tale, which he did not believe in and never hoped to see with his own eyes. She sincerely apologized for interfering in his dangerous adventure, saying that she could not stand by and watch him risk his life in that forest. The young man only shrugged his shoulders, noting that he did not intend to die. He simply thought only after looking in the mirror did Glenn notice that his eyes now shone with an unfamiliar, bizarre hue. Frana explained that it was her special gift that had given the adventurer true fairy eyes. She revealed a secret to the traveler. These fairy eyes grant magical insight. Plan, captivated by the unusual changes in his body, could not resist and wondered what his new eyes were capable of. The High Fairy assured him that these eyes were indeed endowed with magical powers. The most unique and at the same time most valuable ability was considered the so-called Wandering Eye, a power that gave the ability to instantly move to any point at will. Moreover, this gift gave a special view. The owner of the eye could detect hidden materials, recognize the abilities of others, and in some cases even notice signs of diseases that were invisible to ordinary vision. Among the skills demonstrated were the gift of providence, the sight of foresight, as well as the ability to see the paths of the future, the sight of guidance. Blanc politely asks the fairy of higher rank to wait a little, as he has not yet had time to master all the new skills. Then they mention that the adventurer would be able to use the power of the High Fairy to master her magical abilities. Glenn was amazed. He found it hard to believe in such a thing. It seemed to him something incredible. Venturer asked with interest if there was any special secret to acquiring these skills. However, the Elder Fairy calmly replied that there were no surprises here. These abilities justify every effort made. He explained that the only way to perfect a skill is through constant practice. Glenn nodded in agreement, noting that true mastery only comes through consistent and systematic practice. Expressing sincere gratitude to the girl for the amazing magical gift, the stately fairy suddenly became embarrassed and blushed. After a short pause, she warmly assured her that she was ready to join new adventures and lend a helping hand at any moment. Suddenly, the girl lost consciousness, which frightened the boy quite a bit. Glenn hurriedly tried to understand what had happened to the Supreme Fairy, until one of the little flying assistants explained, "Be careful with your smiles, Glenn. Frana is too much in love and simply cannot stand such emotional strain." Several tiny fairies spoke indignantly, insisting that they too wanted to admire Glenn's unique beauty. The girls shared that this was not the first time something like this had happened to a High Fairy, so they were sure that she would definitely cope. Meanwhile, the little fairies happily surrounded Glenn, asking to chat with them for a while. The adventurer readily responded to their request and willingly paid them attention. Waking up from a long sleep, the High Fairy Freyna took Glenn under her care, starting to teach him the art and train him. At first, it was difficult for the boy, but Freyna did not let him despair. She convinced him that patience and perseverance would definitely lead to victory. The grueling training proved to be a real test for the adventurer. He had no idea how difficult these tasks would prove to be. Impressed by the young man's determination, the High Fairy watched as magic drained Glendon of his last strength, a state that was rare even among seasoned travelers. She wondered for a moment. Was she trying too hard, trying to teach Glenn new skills and abilities? Glenn, who never backed down from a challenge, asked Freyna to keep a close eye on him while he demonstrated all the skills he had already mastered. The eventful day was finally behind him, and it was time to rest. The young traveler, eager to refresh himself, plunged into the cool water near the embankment. This moment became for him a well-deserved reward and a source of new strength. He was truly confused when the slender fairy unexpectedly wanted to keep him company while he was swimming. The girl jokingly called this moment Grumpy Grandpa, because that was what she thought his funny attempts at indignation looked like. As she stood next to him in the fresh water, Freyna wondered thoughtfully if Glenn had gotten used to his new eye yet. He still couldn't enjoy the amazing emerald hue of his own eyes. Freyna cautiously suggested that perhaps it was because of this change that Glenn was looking at him disapprovingly. However, the boy quietly admitted that he liked the color. The High Fairy was instantly embarrassed, and once again found herself on the verge of abdicating her throne. Other tiny bustling fairies are flying swiftly toward the cool spring, and Glenn finds himself thinking that this cozy place is increasingly resembling a crowded holiday. She wondered if Glenn had really noticed her children who had stayed behind. In response, the adventurer asked what exactly she had meant when she mentioned their return. Fifar said that her little descendants have already learned to feel Glenn's magical power and have set off on a journey around the world. Ventura wondered, puzzled, why these tiny winged girls were suddenly so fascinated by him. At this, Frana smiled and explained that it was all about his new development. The High Fairy said that from now on, when all the fairies have combined their magical power, each of them, helping the traveler, will certainly conclude a magical contract with him, which opens access to his energy. Thanks to this, Glenn became the owner of the largest number of contracts with fairies in the world. Ventura was amazed by the amazing abilities, but he was somewhat confused by the little fairy's relentless curiosity. Frana, on the other hand, was alone in her own amazement. She had no idea that her tiny children could exert such a powerful influence. I explained in detail that the reason for all these events lies in the incredible power of the magical contract concluded between her and Glenn. The girl emphasized that her responsibility for the consequences is minimal, because she is the first fairy who dared to make such a magical alliance with a hero. Freyna didn't quite understand what the majestic fairy meant. However, excitement flared up in her chest again, and she resolutely demanded that the hero stop looking at her with such a sly smile. He promised never to do that again, and begged to be let go immediately, for the girl's embrace was causing him unbearable pain. The cooling bath made Glenn feel sick, nauseated, and he soon fell into a restless sleep. Ask for forgiveness from the adventurers, but the young man only sighed and admitted it was all his fault. It was not right to stay naked in the icy river for so long. The fairy promised to get Glenn some fresh fruit, so that he would recover faster and replenish his strength with vitamins. The traveler sincerely thanked the kind girl, and remembered how he had not felt so weak and unhealthy for a long time. He remembered himself as a small boy, a weak boy whose frailty often worried the sisters at the shelter. Among them, Sister Maria stood out in particular. She looked after him with sincere care, and always made sure that he lacked nothing. The caring woman always found words to calm Glenn, convincing him that in time everything would fall into place. Sister Maria's gentle, warm touches left a mark, filling the hero's heart with light. As an adult, Glenn sincerely dreams that this kind woman will continue to be his constant support. Glenn remembered the time the head priest had thrown him out of the church. At that moment, he hadn't even noticed Sister Mary's presence. The most terrifying thing was to imagine that a caring and kind nun would want to interfere with the disgusting gossip that was already spreading around. The tall fairy flew swiftly past, noticing that the exhausted traveler had already fallen asleep and had finally allowed himself a little rest. The next morning, the young adventurer confidently announced that he had fully recovered his strength and was ready for new achievements. The High Fairy, impressed by his unexpectedly rapid healing, immediately suggested that he increase the intensity of his training, seeing his thirst for mastering magical skills. Glenn happily accepted this offer. His determination to master his new power truly knew no bounds. He plunged into training with unquenchable enthusiasm, captivating everyone around him with his exceptional magical talent. Right from the start, the High Fairy instructed him to hone his skill in observing the most subtle movements. This was supposed to teach him to react with lightning speed and dodge the most dangerous blows. He threw himself into the task, displaying genuine dedication and true skill. None of Frey's magical attacks ever hit their target. The High Fairy noted with admiration his astonishingly rapid progress. He told how he had discovered the true source of magic within himself, and it seemed that this was what had helped him master his new abilities. The adventurer noticed Freyna's pensive look. He was interested in what could be worrying the girl so much. The confused girl anxiously asked when Galen would finally leave their enchanted fairy world. This unexpected question caught the hero by surprise, as he had never once considered leaving this magical place. He admits that he never thought he would leave the friendly world of fairies, although he longed to test his renewed magic beyond the realms. But now, with the comfort of his own room and spacious bathroom, he feels a deep peace and unwavering serenity. Adventures have proven that for him the main thing is not to avoid loneliness, but to feel the support of a faithful friend nearby. It is this desire that inspires him to stay in the amazing fairy tale world. The High Fairy was touched by his words so deeply that tears of joy shone in her eyes. Pearl enthusiastically plunged into a new adventure, openly admitting that Glenn's decision brought her indescribable joy. At that moment, the boy suddenly found himself in a strong embrace, and almost screaming in pain, asked Fran to let him go immediately, because he could barely stand the thrill. The Cream Fairy sincerely apologized for her clumsy behavior, but Glenn only smiled faintly, assuring her that he held no grudge. Perhaps he was the one who hadn't noticed how anxious Frana was about the possibility of his farewell. To distract the girl, who was filled with tears, Venturer suggested that she return to her magical exercises. He frankly admitted that he had used magic since a young age, but had never seriously pursued improving his talent. In the wonderful land of fairies, Glengoth achieved mastery of all the elements of magic. This was a remarkable breakthrough for him, and the journey itself opened up wide horizons for him to grow and improve his magical skills. The High Fairy explained that it was her incomprehensible power that made all this miracle possible. From now on, Glenn is truly able to use the elemental magic of those with whom he created this magical kingdom. She accepted the offer without hesitation, deciding to immediately immerse herself in training. She promised Glenn to reveal all the secrets of perfect mastery of her power. Their adventures held their breath in anticipation of new achievements, wondering, what surprise would this day begin with? It turned out that for Glenn, everything was extremely simple. He just had to ask for power for himself. Realizing this, the traveler remembered the magic he knew so well, and the solution became obvious. Without wasting time, he turned to the fairies with a sincere request to share their power with him. The lightning that broke from the hero's hand instantly absorbed all the powerful magical energy of the fairies. As soon as he felt the furious flow of energy, he immediately realized, such power is not given just like that. The High Fairy confirmed his thoughts and warned that Glenn would soon face trials, because there would always be envious people for whom such power would remain unattainable. The Seeker was once again reminded, in this world, the real danger lies in ordinary human envy, because it is it that pushes people to the most terrible actions. In the end, the head fairy gives Glenn some solid advice: to stay away from using fairy magic in the human world if possible. Ventura speculated that after that, all the fairies might start avoiding him, which immediately reminded him of those bitter moments in his childhood, when his peers ignored him and deliberately left him aside. Glenn was overcome with sadness and anxiety. It hurt him to be alone, and more than anything in the world he wanted to play with other children. At that moment, Glenn realized that returning to the cruel human world would mean saying goodbye to the gentle, good-natured fairies, and he did not want that. The Venturer solemnly vowed to stand firm to the end, and deliver a crushing rebuff to anyone who dared to attack him or these majestic fairy creatures. Ventura explained to the High Fairy that his adventure card was expiring in 10 months, so he urged her to speed up her math studies as soon as possible. When asked about his excessive activity, Glent explained that he had become convinced that the world was full of insidious villains and scoundrels. So, In order to be able to punish anyone who dared to disturb their peace, he decided to train relentlessly and achieve absolute mastery of his own power. She firmly decided to cheer up her lover, and suggested that he immediately begin an incredibly important mission. Fairy had her apprentice Glenn begin target practice, demanding impeccable accuracy from him, even as exhaustion set in. Not allowing himself to think about defeat for a moment, the adventurer enthusiastically set about the task. Within minutes, each target was hit with astonishing accuracy, and Glenn confidently declared that from now on, his sight would be unmatched. The training was crowned with a real victory. Glenn demonstrated amazing accuracy, hitting the target flawlessly from any position time and time again, and each of his shots was distinguished by lightning speed. His heart was pounding with excitement as he finally stood before him. Pearl wondered for a moment if Glenn would have the strength to do it if she suddenly made his training more intense. The boy confidently promised to show everything he was capable of, and the High Fairy supported him, assuring him not to hold back and reveal his full potential. In the end, the young adventurer managed to brilliantly pass all the tests that Franna thoughtfully and defiantly set for him. Impressed by his perseverance and unexpected skill, the girl sincerely admitted that she had actually underestimated neither his strength nor his enthusiasm. He explained in detail that all this had been achieved through continuous, intense training, and asked what awaited them ahead. However, the boy could already feel his strength leaving him, and fatigue was gradually taking over. Freyna, however, noted with a smile that this was only a light warm-up, and the real test was yet to come. I explained in detail that the next test would require the help of her little creatures. And at that very moment, behind the adventurers, with a slight rustle, a whole flock of tiny fairies emerged, melodiously whispering mysterious words among themselves. Venturer reveled in the genuine joy of this touching meeting, as the little fairies did not hide their admiration for him. Meanwhile, Franna said that the next step would be training to establish a magical connection with other fairies. Fairy asked Glenn to mobilize all his strength to communicate with all the fairies at the same moment. But this task seemed extremely difficult. Glenn had never faced such a challenge before. First, they suggested establishing a connection between them. Only then could she transfer all her power to Glenn. As soon as this mysterious ritual begins, magical energy will instantly rage in his body, and Glenn will be forced to immediately face all the consequences of such a supernatural rite. At the crucial moment of the training, Glenn finally understood the meaning of the task and instantly grabbed the girl's hands, preparing for a whirlwind of powerful magical energy. However, at first, nothing special happened around, so he gathered all his attention and focused on the action. After a few minutes of futile effort, the frustrated adventurer, in despair, withdrew his hands from the upper crossing and sighed heavily. His efforts were in vain. Then Frenna advised him to remain calm and try again, for it was at such moments, she said, that Glenn would be able to feel how truly strong he had become. The girl had no intention of giving in, tirelessly encouraging her student to be more confident and courageous. She was convinced that only in this way could he conquer the heights of magical art. Glenn delicately took the girl's hand, and she, speaking softly, advised him to close his eyes and think. Does he really realize the value of his path, and how easily he meets all the difficulties? All he had to do was feel the powerful flow of magic that invisibly connected him to the other fairies, and everything would fall into place. Glenn focused his attention, and soon a wave of immense magical power flowed through him. Finding himself in Franna's tender embrace, Glenn once again felt an irresistible desire to stay with this unique beauty. Everything turned out perfectly. The High Fairy warmly greeted the hero, sincerely admiring his skill in creating a magical connection. He felt his magical power grow incredibly quickly, filling his entire being with unknown strength. The hero admitted with confidence on his face. Now he is able to defeat even a dragon. His determination only grew stronger, and his thirst for new achievements burned even brighter. Exhausted after strenuous training, Glenn and Franna again chose a moment to relax in the hot tub, although this time it impressed them with its luxury and fullness of sensations. Franna still couldn't get out of her thoughts, and Glenn asked with genuine curiosity what was bothering the girl so much. She admitted that she was confused by one question: why it was so difficult for her to establish a magical connection with him. While with other fairies it happened much easier and more naturally. The traveler said that everything seemed quite clear. It was Franna who first opened the way for him to master this power. Hearing this, the elder fairy quickly regained control of herself and felt a surge of energy. and Glenn added that fairies are extraordinary creatures, because at that moment he was overwhelmed by a wave of incredible emotions. Obtaining the magical power needed for the adventure turned out to be surprisingly easy. Then Frana reminded Glenn that he would still be pursued, and even if the royal power itself was behind him, he would still have enough strength to give a worthy rebuff to any enemy. Glenn could not find the words to answer such words. It was clear that defeating the pony would be a real test for him. The High Fae emphasized that the enemies now cast a shadow over the glory of the entire Fae people, and therefore, they will not allow Glenn to fight the difficulties alone. From now on, he must remember that loneliness is a thing of the past. Together with them, a new life path begins for him. He suddenly realized that with a powerful army of fairies at his disposal, nothing and no one would stand in his way. Life was certainly much more pleasant without opponents, and if he had to fight, it would only be with those who were truly worthy of the challenge, real monsters. The fairies shared this opinion, but deep down they still cherished the hope of seeing Glenn in a duel with a real dragon. Adventure thought it would be a great opportunity to try his hand at a training match, and even at the very beginning, he had a chance to prove himself as the towering fairy could already taste victory. It only remained to find out which of the participants would reveal their true power in the decisive duel. The little fairies were filled with excitement for the upcoming duel, and they cheerfully suggested that the duel begin with a count of 3. Glenn and Fran prepared themselves intensely, determined not to give way to each other for a moment. Frana rushed to attack, and at the same moment bright magical charges flashed in the air, each of them radiating incredible power. The magical projectiles came together in the air with a roar, instantly destroying each other. The majestic fairy praised her student with a smile, and her eyes lit up with excitement. She was ready to continue this exciting duel. Finally, I recognized that Glenn was not just a master of magic, but a person who could surpass his own limits. It was at this crucial moment that fate prepared a test, and the girl held her breath in anticipation of how Glenn would reveal the full power of his talent. The strongest magical currents converged in a fierce duel, but the opponent proved invincible. Frana could not withstand the insane force, and was thrown aside. Glenn, overcome with triumph, finally achieved the dream victory over the most powerful of his rivals. After this failure, the High Fairy was overcome with bitter disappointment and a suppressed wave of rage. Glenn could not help but notice her sadness, and immediately tried to support her. But the fairy still remained upset about her own failure. She wondered if Fran had forgotten that confession when she told him that she had been secretly watching him for a long time, and found it surprisingly fascinating. To confirm his words, the adventurer insisted, if this was really the case, then she knew exactly how he always visited this institution. For the High Fairy, this situation appeared in a completely different light. Her feelings were far from pain. Frana admitted with sadness on her face that she had suspected this, but hearing such words was unbearably difficult for her. After that, the High Fairy clarified whether she had understood correctly that Glenn had never really used lightning magic to heal the mind. Carol said that this treatment was Glenn's salvation. His emotional pain finally found a way out, and the closeness with the girls helped him cope with the torment. He wondered if he should have stopped and not done so at some point. Frana admitted that this choice was hardly the best way to solve his difficulties, and sincerely asked the traveler to promise that he would not repeat such a mistake again. Venture promised himself not to pay any more attention to the brothels, because now he was surrounded by a whole cloud of beautiful fairies. They were always there, capturing his attention and instantly dispelling all worries. Frana jokingly emphasized that this is the power of true friendship. Friends are always there when you need them most. He wondered if he understood correctly that in the magical world of Fairies, the seasons never changed. The elder fairy replied that this was done on purpose, so that the inhabitants could play more comfortably and enjoyably. He asked with curiosity what time of year it was in the human world, where he came from. Frana, after thinking for a moment, replied that, if her memory served her right, it was the middle of winter on Earth. It is worth remembering that he had come to the fairy world in the spring, so it had been almost a year since this amazing country had given him shelter. Summing up her experiences, Frana once again noted how unusual and unique this adventure had seemed. It occurred to him that his adventurer card was about to expire, which was why Frana hurried to get to the most important question. Interested, Glenn turned to the majestic fairy to clarify what she meant. The hero explained that this whole procedure had one goal, to determine who would accompany Glenn on her journey to the human world. Frana clarified that fairies usually accompany those with whom they are bound by a magical agreement. However, it must be remembered that a traveler will not be able to remain unnoticed if he is followed by a whole flock of playful fairies. He couldn't figure out what the point of this was. After all the miniature fairies had already made a deal with them. They really like to marry. Venture insisted that no fairy should be left out. That would be a real injustice. But Frana warned Glenn that if he took all the little fairies with him, he could face serious problems in the human world. But the boy was not at a loss, and resolutely replied that thanks to careful preparation, he was able to cope with any difficulties. It remained to figure out how to arrange everything so that no one else could see the fairies. Frana could not help but admire the confidence and determination with which Glenn had taken on this difficult task. She hugged the adventurer again so tightly that it was hard not to feel her sincere gratitude. The other fairies around her also did not hide their joy. The news that Glenn agreed to take them with him caused everyone to be delighted. However, the hug turned out to be so tight that Glenn found it difficult to breathe, and he politely asked the girl to loosen the hug a little. Then he asked what their intentions were with the little fairies. Frana told him that her children had an amazing ability to become invisible without any magic. The fairy chief decided to demonstrate this right now. She disappeared right in front of everyone, and the traveler could not hide his amazement at such unexpected skill. It is worth remembering. Other fairies always sense this connection, so anyone who has made a magical pact with them will remain under their watch. Glenn noted that he could not influence this, because his expressive, unusual eye color directly indicated a special alliance with the fairies. The venturer said that for him, above all, he enjoys spending his days with the fairies, and together with them, he is sure that they will overcome any difficulties that arise in their path. The fairy agreed and emphasized that it was necessary to prepare for such a dangerous journey with special care, taking into account all possible difficulties in advance. To protect her magical world, Frana has placed elaborate magical traps along its borders. The girl has assured that these unusual devices will reliably stop anyone who dares to cross the border of their home. When asked about his attitude towards his former team and the church's ministers, adventurer Len answered with icy calm. All those who betrayed him and left him to his fate have now become his enemies. He is ready to wipe them off the face of the earth without a shadow of regret. With a twinkle in her eye, Fairy suggested that she arrange a special bath for her favorite student. The idea appealed to Glenn gladly himself, who immediately supported the proposal. Despite the fact that Flora was now among people, she stubbornly continued to search for Glenn, not departing from the chosen path, and insisted that her request be fulfilled immediately. She was simply seething with emotion, and insisted on immediately getting to know the results of her own investigation, because finding out where Glenn was of crucial importance. Her assistant gently reminded her that Flora seemed to lose her usual composure whenever she was faced with this complex case, and advised her to calm down a bit. The girl carefully reminded her that it was thanks to Glenn that Renawa was able to see the world. The assistant supported Flora, sincerely agreeing and confirming that he perfectly understood all her worries. After that, he asked for a detailed description of the progress of the investigation to that point. The deputy reported that Glenn had already been expelled from the group, and the suspect himself had meanwhile gone to the church where he had spent his childhood. Since then, there has been no news of Glenn's further journey. His true whereabouts are still shrouded in mystery. Flora concentratedly suggested, if everything happened exactly as she imagined, the moral is, Glenn's bizarre actions were likely the result of the constant gossip that swirled around his name. That is why it was necessary to restore his unblemished reputation as quickly as possible, even if Glenn himself considered these attempts futile. The assistant shared the news. Glenn's former team was already falling apart and had suffered several devastating defeats. It was extremely important for the team leader to understand that it was thanks to Glenn that their team remained united. But now, all the participants set off on an exciting journey, taking a newcomer with them. In fact, he had anticipated such a turn of events, and with a sly glint in his eyes, noted that the real fun was just beginning, and watching this spectacle would be incredibly exciting. Charles's assistant could not help but notice how Flora's face lit up with confidence and satisfaction at that moment. He promised not to stop in his research and sincerely wished Flora a successful February adventure. Investigating the disappearance of the legendary traveler was a real challenge for the investigator. Flora was secretly worried about the lack of visible progress, but deep down she cherished the belief that things could still turn in her favor. The next morning, Renewal, the company's director, was surprised to find a young stranger in her office. The smiling blonde introduced herself as Maria Baron, the youngest daughter of Count Baron. She explained that she had come here to find out the details of a mysterious missing adventure or brilliance. However, she immediately asked to be addressed simply as Maria, as she did not like the formal address in communication. He was struck by the unusual reason for the blonde's appearance, but he soon remembered how Glenn had shared stories about Maria, a woman who had taught him many things, including how to understand complex documents in different languages. She admitted that she had heard a lot of interesting things about Maria from Glenn, so we could say that they knew each other at least indirectly. The blonde elegantly sipped another sip of fragrant tea, and, with a smile, politely asked if Maria would mind asking a few questions. She sincerely asked to tell more about the mysterious incident connected with the disappearance, because she was deeply worried about the fate of Glenn's. In response, Flora explained in a moment, concentrated and serious. The investigation turned out to be extremely complicated. There were still many unexplained details. She admitted that she was terribly worried about Glenn, because there was no one who knew this guy more deeply and intimately than she did. It is not surprising that the rapid rhythm of life in the capital left its mark on Glenn's fate and character. It is quite likely that he changed under its influence. Maria hadn't seen Glenn for many years, all because of endless worries and important matters. After this long separation, as soon as she saw him, she excitedly hurried to find out how the guys on his team were doing. Because they had all grown up together, united since childhood within the walls of their native church. She shared that she learned about a new member of the team who couldn't fit in and left within a month of joining. Rumor has it that there are unofficial rumors of possible abuse against this guy, and it is assumed that those who work with him one-on-one are involved in this. She firmly declared that she did not even entertain the thought that Glenn could stain himself with such a shameful act. Moreover, both the team of adventurers led by Elaine and the church itself, in her opinion, had fallen to a completely disappointing level. Flora listened to Maria with surprise and admiration, for she had never imagined that she, who had been a pillar of the church for many years, could express such a sharp condemnation. He discovered the truth. The money Glenn had sent had been embezzled by the abbot of the monastery. Now that treacherous minister was serving a sentence behind bars. Flora recalled the numerous requests Glenn had received, and all his actions were unmistakable evidence of his sincere devotion to the church and his concern for the orphans. She said that she turned to Flora's company to find Glenn's trail because his fate was troubling her. After thinking for a few seconds, he asked Maria if she was encountering any difficulties. She admitted that she was quite capable of providing shelter for the orphans, but organizing food and clothing for them was much more difficult. Flora carefully wrote down what she had heard and promised to think about how to help solve this difficult matter. She emphasized that she in no way wanted Glenn to think that her company had abandoned its concern for his family. She sighed with relief. The support was vital for her, as it was becoming increasingly difficult to cope with the care of so many orphans on her own. Meanwhile, Glannon, together with the High Fairy, thanks to her amazing ability to travel between worlds, had already found herself in the human world. The young adventurer frankly admitted that he really missed the colors and bustle of the capital. Thanks to the magical transport, his journey became surprisingly easy and fast. However, crowds of people crowded near the gates of the capital, each of whom wanted to get inside. After looking at everyone with an attentive and experienced look, the young man instantly assessed the situation. The queue was mostly ordinary townspeople, and therefore he decided to change the direction of his route. He has a top-level adventurer's card, a testament to his considerable exploits. That's why he's headed to the Adventurers Guild today. It's time to update his document. The guild administrator was quite surprised when Glenn suddenly appeared. The investigation into his disappearance remained the focus of everyone's attention. So Flora's assistant immediately rushed to report the news. Impressed by Ludger's assistant's sincere emotions, he immediately asked what was the matter. However, instead of a lengthy explanation, Ludger only silently pointed to Glenn, which greatly surprised the director's acquaintance. Ludger did not hide his delight at the return of the famous traveler, and immediately rushed to hug Glenn. However, Glenn did not even think of accepting such sincere congratulations. With one sharp movement he moved away, wanting to leave this company as soon as possible. Together with her assistant, she watched the adventurer's magical movements with admiration, not even noticing the unusual sparkle in Glenn's eyes. Meanwhile, the adventurer, irritated by the behavior of his former friends, persistently demanded permission to come closer and see everything with his own eyes. In the short story, Flora is pleasantly surprised to learn that Glenn has actually spent all this time in the magical world of fairies. To back up his story, Glenn asks Frayne to take him there and show him this amazing place. Fairy, without wasting a moment, appeared and greeted Glenn's friends with a smile. Flora and Ludger frankly confessed that they had been racking their brains over Glenn's mysterious disappearance until now, but now everything had fallen into place. The reason for their friend's absence had finally become clear. Flora clarified whether she had understood correctly. It turned out that it was thanks to Fairy that Glenn had ended up in a different place. Venturer said that this was only a tiny fraction of the amazing prospects that opened up before him with the advent of a new magical power. In response, Ledger asked if he was sure he could even talk about such things. Ventura listened carefully to Lejor's warnings, recognizing that the situation could indeed turn into great trouble for him. However, it should not be forgotten that Flora and Lejor had been by his side from the very beginning, always remaining his reliable support. To be honest, I had no idea Glenn would ever say something like that. But at that moment, the door suddenly opened, and Mary appeared in the doorway. As soon as she saw Glenn alive and well, her heart was filled with indescribable joy. Emotions overflowed so much that tears appeared in her eyes. Maria also did not hide her feelings, sincerely admitting that she was infinitely happy about Glenn's decision to return to the capital. Find out how Nun Maria ended up in Flora's house. The company manager noticed that the story was too long because, after listening to Maria, Glenn tried to convey that much more insidious things were happening within the walls of the church. Stealing money was just the tip of the iceberg among the many crimes committed there. He asked with genuine interest how Elaine and the other members of his former team were doing now. Flora promised to tell them all about their achievements soon, without withholding any details. He carefully placed several heavy folders on the table, explaining that they contained archival documents about the adventure squads. Glenn could now personally examine all of these materials. After reviewing old archives, Glenn realized with alarm that things were going downhill for his former team. The reserves of quality raw materials for organizing adventures were almost exhausted. The group's rating had dropped from C to D, and a newcomer named Rouse had decided to leave the team. He asked Flora what motivated her to investigate his previous team's cases so thoroughly. The girl replied that every piece of information could be the key to uncovering the connection between the events and crimes in which children were likely involved. He shared a fascinating story about how he once spotted a strange stranger in the maze, whom Elaine had been secretly meeting with, hiding it from the rest of the team. Intrigued, Glenn decided to track down this mysterious figure. After thinking about it, he admitted that the Labyrinth was the perfect place for secret rendezvous. Glenn remembered another detail: the strange pendant in the shape of a sword with a snake wrapped around the blade that the strange stranger was wearing. He quickly flipped through a few pages and stopped at an illustration of a familiar sword adorned with a snake. Noticing the similarity of the symbols, Blaine wondered if it was a sign of belonging to some mysterious organization. She confirmed that this was indeed the case, although her idea of the organization was limited to its name and mysterious symbol. However, it was now clear that these mysterious individuals were involved in a crime committed by a group of adventurers, which was an important clue for further investigation. Mary immediately noted Glenn's quick wit, and Luger added that thanks to his attentiveness, they were able to advance one step further in the investigation. Then he warmly welcomed Glenn on his return, and frankly admitted that he had long dreamed of this moment, because now solving the crime would be much easier. Ventura sincerely thanked him for the fact that his efforts were still being appreciated. Meanwhile, Glenn decided that tomorrow he needed to earn some extra money and invite Frayne and her fairies to spend the day together. The girl, without hesitation, readily agreed and gave her word. He explained that the next day they would set off into the labyrinth to search for the necessary raw materials. But first, they needed to ensure the safety of the fairies, so that they would remain invisible to prying eyes. Frayne hesitated whether such a risk was justified for the sake of certain materials, and whether it was worth stepping into unknown territory. But Frano was already prepared for any surprises that awaited them ahead. One of the participants explained that their task was to destroy monsters in order to obtain valuable materials that could be sold at a profit. Frana understood that the main goal of this adventure was to make a considerable profit. He watched in amazement as strange spots of light flickered on the walls of the labyrinth. Glenn clarified that this glow was created by a special moss that filled the stone corridors with bright light, enveloping everything around with a magical atmosphere. During his journey, Adventure found not only valuable ore, but also collected healing herbs, noting that they could be a good source of income. For Freyna, this was a real discovery, as it was the first time she had encountered such a lucrative opportunity. The influential fairy immediately sensed danger. A crowd of hostile orcs was rapidly approaching, and their numbers were staggering. One of the inquisitive travelers noted that it was important to preserve the giant orcs in their original form, as this was the only way they would remain valuable for sale. It all depended on how much effort was put into keeping them from losing their strength and appearance. She immediately suggested using water magic in the battle with the monsters, because this element had proven to be the most effective weapon against the orcs. The little fairies solemnly swore to their leader to make every effort and use all their skills to help her accomplish her plan. Water magic instantly wiped out an entire pack of fierce orcs. Glenn watched in amazement at what the little fairies were capable of. Their water element had proven dangerously destructive. In addition, he wanted to show off his renewed magical talents and easily dealt with several horned wolves. With his new strength, his body was filled with energy, and he immediately noticed how the magic had not only strengthened his muscles, but also sharpened his reactions. After a careful inspection of the loot, Bland confidently declared that it promised them a solid profit. Meanwhile, the enchanted alien was content with a pitiful reward, barely enough for the most necessary things. After looking at the amount with displeasure, he told the team, this money would barely be enough to rent a room where they could visit later. The girls said that this could not go on any longer. It was difficult for Elaine to cope in Vanguard all alone. However, they could not find real, reliable support. In the end, they came to the conclusion that someone was deliberately tarnishing their reputation, spreading gossip and slandering the team, which is why there are no more people who want to join. There was extreme outrage at how quickly Rose left the team, leaving his teammates stranded without any support. And Glenn disappeared so unexpectedly that only silence and emptiness remained in his wake. He asked Emily not to be angry anymore, because, according to him, a sincere smile suits her much better than an angry look. As soon as the girl heard this, she became embarrassed, apologized, and promised to keep her emotions under control in the future. Emily was advised to let Glenn go once and for all, as he had left their team and was unlikely to ever return. Elaine, meanwhile, was sincerely glad of this, because from now on, her dearest friend belonged only to her. Elaine remembered the first time he met Glenn, a boy who had been a little older than him as a child. Elaine thought the child was too aloof and withdrawn. But with the arrival of Emily, Glenna suddenly became fascinated with this little one. Glowing with jealousy, she suddenly wondered why Emily spent all her time with Glenn. The girl confessed without hesitation. Her heart belonged to Glenn, and she dreamed of becoming his wife one day. Lane felt a sudden surge of envy and hatred for Glenn, and a fierce rivalry began between the two boys. Once, a monk from the monastery asked the children if they had thought about what they wanted to be when they left the walls of the church. Elaine explained that she and Glenn and Emily had decided to choose the fate of adventurers. However, for Glenn this was a real surprise, because he had never heard of such intentions before. He decided that if he was defeated in the church, he would turn the free world into a battlefield for his insidious plan to separate Emily and Glenn. Even as a child, Elaine had persistently woven a web of suspicion, spreading bad rumors about Glenn. Eventually, Elaine exaggerated the gossip, skillfully sowing doubt in the minds of others. She convinced everyone that Glenn was just for fun and was a complete fake. It was these poisonous rumors that became an invisible wedge that gradually destroyed the friendship between Emily and Glenn. Oral could no longer look at Glenn in the old way. A series of accusations hit his heart painfully, and sincere feelings gave way to bitter hatred for the one he had so passionately loved until recently. At the time, no one could understand why Glenn had so stubbornly remained on the team, even though working with these people was exhausting him to the point of exhaustion. Only unforeseen circumstances later revealed the reason. Glenn was burdened with numerous assignments that required immediate execution. Liars sensed Glenn's mood slipping and firmly emphasized that this routine was leading nowhere. He insisted that the time had come for a drastic change in his life. He realized that Glenn would soon exhaust his strength, holding back his emotions. However, the man only shrugged, saying that nothing could be changed. Such was the fate of a true adventurer. Maria could not accept this, and instead desperately looked for a way to support Glenn and restore his faith in himself. Fortunately, Maria failed to make the impression she had hoped for, so she apologized for her appearance, slightly upset. She carefully followed the course of events, constantly reminding him that life goes on, and he has no right to pretend that he has already left this world. Meanwhile, Elaine persistently spread insidious rumors about Glenn, secretly disdaining his team. As the leader of the team, he never missed an opportunity to humiliate Glenn, and often invited Emily to his place for the evening, promising her a relaxing break in his company. However, despite such actions, he did not seek to truly hurt Glenn or confuse him. The Edge of the World chose the most honorable path. He firmly ordered Glenn to leave here immediately. Elaine found herself in a difficult situation. He still had not found a worthy successor for Glenn, and with almost no offers with good pay on the horizon, finances were rapidly melting away. At this moment, Elaine overheard young men nearby talking animatedly about Glenn finally returning to the capital. He instantly conceived a new insidious intrigue, because the man he hated suddenly turned out to be right next to him. He was enjoying the capital's most exquisite dishes, which he had recently been longing for. Meanwhile, the famous adventurer became the subject of lively discussion among the townspeople, as their attitude towards him had changed dramatically due to a series of recent incidents. There was always someone nearby whom almost no one noticed, and it was he who watched with amazement how Glenn, like a magnet, attracted all the attention of those present. Adventure noted with a smile. The most important thing was that everything happened without excessive cruelty. It was then that Gallius Silver, the current commander of the Silver Squad, drew attention to Glenn. The unexpected meeting with an experienced traveler who had not visited the capital for a long time was a real surprise. Meanwhile, Gallius announced his intention to ask Glena a few questions. Gallius reproachfully remarked that as soon as he left the capital, Glenn disappeared into obscurity, once again proving his complete disregard for him. To this, Glenn coldly and briefly remarked, he had always treated Gallius with detachment, so there was no reason for offense. In response, Gallius only smiled and noted that now he recognized an old acquaintance in this old man. Glenn countered by reminding Gallius that there had never been any real friendship or deep trust between them. In response, Gallius blamed Glenn for this and reminded him that he had repeatedly offered him to be part of his team. Then he declared that his own fairies had awakened, captivated by the incredible beauty of Glenn's fairies. Glenn remarked wearily that this was probably the case. He was again pressured into joining the clan, but these persuasions made no impression on either Glenn or the Abbey. He made it clear that his choice was final and irrevocable. He stubbornly stood his ground, not hiding that he had always been captivated by Glenn's charms. However, the green-eyed adventurer, apparently tired of this conversation, coldly replied that he was completely indifferent to Gallius's plans. After these words, Glenn turned to Frayne, wanting to hear her opinion. Supreme Fairy had already met with Gallius Fairy, and in the conversation he discovered that the Silver Knights clan was a community of extremely close-knit and sincere people, who were worth testing with trust. In the end, the client listened carefully to the advice of the High Fairy and informed Gallius of his readiness to cooperate, but without immediately signing a contract to join the clan. The joyful Gallius reacted positively, offering to conclude a contract later, when Glenn could get used to their team. However, Glenn refrained from making any promises, emphasizing that this issue would remain open and could be returned to later. Ludger approached Glenn, announcing that the survey was complete. Glenn was quick to praise his old friend for the masterful job he had done, to which Ludger replied that everything had gone surprisingly quickly, thanks to the coordinated work of the entire team. Surprised, they asked him how Glenn had managed to gather so many resources, since he seemed completely unconcerned about having to use them a second time. Glenn scanned the expertly prepared documents with incredible speed and confidently declared that he was completely satisfied with both the content and the prices offered. Ludger could only marvel at the lightning-fast ease with which Glenn had handled such a mass of papers. The adventurer pointed out to him that the new eyes did not allow him to do this as before, since Elven Vision allowed him to instantly read and analyze any information. Ledger's response only emphasized how useful this new gift had proven to be. Harding, Glenn promised Nino that he would accept his participation if he could provide additional resources for trade. Later, Gallius revealed to Glenn that his clan consisted not only of brave adventurers, but also of master craftsmen, and the total number of members reached approximately 50 people. Glenn and Gallius entered the majestic main office of the Silver Knights clan. Here, the leader solemnly addressed those present, emphasizing that a guest of special importance had visited them today. Smiling, he introduced Glenn, informing everyone present that this renowned adventurer would be joining our common cause for a while. As soon as Glenn's name was mentioned, a gloomy shadow passed over the faces of everyone present. Everyone here had heard only bad rumors about this adventurer. Glenn instantly noticed this reaction and voiced his suspicions to Halais. The boys and girls did not like him. Halais only remained silent because he himself had not expected such tension from Glenn's appearance. The members of the Silver Knight clan were stunned when the legendary adventurer appeared before them. They did not immediately believe that it was not a hallucination. Almost everyone present expressed their sincere respect and admiration for Glenn. After all, everyone knows well how many complex and risky missions he has flawlessly completed. One of the adventurers admitted with admiration that they were filled with pride for Glenn, who had earned an honorary rank through his own efforts, and thus became a real example for them to follow. Glenn was truly amazed. Instead of seeing him as a criminal, people sincerely considered him a hero. Gallius, noticing how sincerely surprised Glenn was, only laughed, and with a smile noted that everything was not as bad as it might seem at first glance. It is explained that the deep meaning of the Silver Knights clan's motto is in sincere freedom, which anyone can gain. In this clan, no one is forced to work. Everything is based solely on voluntary choice. This rule is unwavering, no matter what the circumstances. Glenn thought for a moment. It was thanks to this arrangement that everyone was given the chance to show their strength and true value. Glenn and Halais agreed to spend a month working together to allow Glenn to make a final decision about whether to join the Silver Knights. As soon as this news spread through the capital, the city was filled with genuine astonishment and excitement. The rumors spread like wildfire, and Glenn was pleasantly surprised by how easily information spread. However, Gallius encouraged him, telling him not to worry too much and to focus on the positive aspects of the situation. He then explains to his new partner, "The information received from Glenn is much more valuable than any treasures, because Carol collected it with rare diligence and care." Remembering Carol, Glenn instantly called the girl a lousy cat, who, in his opinion, only knows how to spread lies about him. But Gallius hastened to calm his friend, advising him not to react to insults, because thanks to Kev, everyone has long known about Glenn's many good traits. Ashton excitedly asked Glenn to demonstrate his new magical skills and go on an extraordinary adventure together. Quickly noticing two creepy creatures nearby, he immediately activated an energy barrier against them. Just one light gesture from Glenn wiped them off the face of the earth once and for all. This incredible power stunned even the experienced traveler Halais, who had never seen such power before. The members of the Silver Knights clan, amazed by the spectacle of incomprehensible magical power, turned their gazes towards Halais with excitement, asking him if Glenn himself had arrived at this place. He said that Glenn Hyenu had not previously possessed extraordinary magical power, but now his power was truly astonishing. The subordinates began to ask about Glenn with keen interest. The leader of the Silver Knights replied that this warrior had long been the subject of legends. They said that he had almost risen to the level of S-Rex. There is no doubt that this is a story of dedication and tireless determination. Glendivet dedicates every free moment to intense training, which has allowed him to conquer incredible heights. Now it became clear, far from the capital, Glenn did not waste time in vain, but worked tirelessly on the task entrusted to him. In just a few minutes, Glenn brilliantly demonstrated his ability to control several elements at once: fire, water, and wind. And when it was time for the last enemy, with a light movement of his hand, he instantly turned him into an ice statue. Then he turned to Halais, eager to know what he thought of his own powers. The leader of the Silver Knights was genuinely shocked by what he saw and honestly admitted that he was almost overcome with fear, and it would be better if he did not have to experience such worries. The girls confidently assured that Glenn's blows were nothing more than amplification magic, because one of them herself possessed the art of such combat and was well versed in such techniques. Remind yourself, the girl's name was Rick. He agreed with her thoughts, but noted that he used reinforcement magic a little differently. Ventura said that he draws this power from the very heart of his being and does not borrow it from outside as others do. To master such a skill, it is not enough to simply copy his steps. First of all, you must thoroughly study the anatomy of the human body. If Rick takes on this challenge, a real triumph will soon await her. Inspired by determination, the girl promised herself to constantly improve and prove her skills in practice every time, despite the excitement before her favorite adventure. However, before taking a decisive step forward, she carefully weighed every detail. carefully thinking through all the important nuances. Taking Rick's example, all of Galeus's students sought to strengthen their magical skills in order to fight the terrifying monsters even more confidently. When they asked his subordinates if they realized who this mysterious glam adventurer really was, and if anyone really felt hatred for him, it became clear. Honesty forced them to immediately admit the truth. All those present unanimously noted with admiration that they liked Jin extremely much, and his talents aroused genuine admiration in them. An announcement was made that today's demonstration was over, and everyone present was politely asked to leave the hall. Glenn remarked that everyone could go ahead, but he would stay a little longer and soon catch up with the group. Galeus did not object, and suggested that they gather at the road. Thanks to his subtle magical sense, Glenn almost immediately caught Carol's energy nearby, and he was haunted by an unsettling thought. What prompted the girl to secretly watch him? The cheerful cat girl happily greeted Glenn, immediately noting his achievements, which breathed new life into their travels. Reminding Glenn how long it had been since they last met, the adventurer made it clear that she was not pleased with the pause, calling Carol lousy cap. Suddenly filled with anger, the girl lunged forward with fervor, attempting to strike. But Glenn easily parried the attack. Without any explanation, he suddenly grabbed the girl by the leg and lifted her lightly into the air. Carol indignantly demanded that he immediately let her go and stop calling her Lousy the Cat. But instead of fulfilling her request, the adventurer immediately and ingeniously suggested a new nickname for her. Finally, the traveler let the girl go, and Carol, with her characteristic severity, warned Glenn to choose his words more carefully, since she was older than he. But despite this, Glenn had no intention of changing his behavior towards Carol until she stopped trying to follow him. He had no idea that he would suddenly laugh, and later be forced to admit. Only now does he realize how wrong he was. After all, there is no person in the world who is capable of competing with her so skillfully in verbal duels. The girl, beaming with sincere joy, met Glenn and admitted with emotion that this month of waiting seemed like an eternity to her. The adventurer remained unmoved, even when Carol, outraged by his indifference, insisted that Glenn could at least thank her. However, he firmly refused, explaining that he was not going to succumb to such cunning and impudent provocations. He asked if Carol had been with him lately when he had been on assignments from the capital. She frankly admitted that Glenn had changed a lot, so she had had to search and gather information literally everywhere. He insisted on truthful information about the capital, emphasizing that it was her fault for not informing Galeus of her location. Carol immediately denied any involvement in the matter. Glenn calmly revealed his knowledge to the girl. He was perfectly aware of the cunning way in which she had entered the clan, and was quite capable of betraying her to the guards. Carol's heart contracted with fear, and she, holding her breath, begged him not to do this, because only in this way could she escape the inevitable danger. She firmly promised not to do that again, and at the same moment she noticed that the voice of the person she was talking to had become completely different. Carol admitted her guilt, but at the same time she carelessly overlooked one truly key detail. The girl shared her feelings about participating in an underground investigation, and to add even more mystery to this conversation, she suddenly began to speak in cat language. Glenn was shocked. He could not imagine Carol as a detective. It seemed to him an absolutely incredible combination. She admitted that she had never worked with such prestigious clients before, so she made every effort to complete the task flawlessly. He instantly realized that Queen Lyciana had unexpectedly found herself next to Carol's client. Catgirl was impressed by his quick wit and his willingness to pay for their dinner if Glenn agreed to her request to help with the investigation. Accepting an invitation to a free dinner, Glenn surprised Carol by ordering an incredible number of dishes just for herself. The girl admitted that she could not imagine how uncontrollable the appetite of a true adventurer can be. Glenn sincerely explained that over the past year he had gradually given up his favorite foods and was now trying to compensate for all the gastronomic losses. Noticing Carol's piercing gaze, he suggested that she voice a question that had apparently been tormenting her soul for a long time. Carol thought for a moment, then quietly said that Glenn had changed significantly since his absence from the capital. Some suggested that the adventurer had finally managed to heal his wounded mind. His heart was filled with delight as he listened to the girl's story, while Carol casually emphasized that she belonged to the cohort of the most skilled female scouts in the entire kingdom. Venture confidently declared his complete recovery, and at that very moment his eyes took on a new, fiery shine that Carol could not help but notice. Meanwhile, the cat girl remarked, "If everything said was true, then Glenn had been healed by a being whose power surpassed even the boundless sea. He could not understand how the holy people could be connected to his fate. But memories of those ancient days when Glenn had been saved by healing magic kept coming back to his mind. She finally told the adventurer that there was no Maria there at all. Glenn had simply made a mistake. In fact, this girl turned out to be the legendary S-class adventurer known to everyone as Saint T Alert. It was at this moment that Fran's voice was heard, subtly emphasizing, "Carol is a true master of words, and very soon she will be able to unravel all the secrets of this magical world." Karen had long since realized this, so he advised the cat girl to change the subject. Carol agreed without objection and immediately voiced her modest request. Glenn sighed with noticeable fatigue, expressing the hope that her request would at least not be too absurd. The request for Carol's came completely unexpectedly. No one could have imagined such a turn of events. After all, it was the girl cat who turned to Flynn with a request to take care of Her Majesty's safety. Ventura was so surprised by what he heard that at first he couldn't believe his ears, and asked if he had really understood everything correctly. Glenn and Carol set out to meet the Queen. However, the path they chose surprised the traveler. In his opinion, the royal castle lay in a completely different direction. Explain that to keep the secret, they need to use a secret passage hidden right in the heart of the capital. After all, true value is best hidden in plain sight, where no one will look for it. That's why they say, if you want to hide a tree, choose the fourth one among all. Finally, the cat-eyed guide led Glenn to the entrance of a surprisingly ordinary building. Its inconspicuousness had still not aroused any suspicions among those around it. He was genuinely surprised, as he had expected to see the Knights of the Royal Guard here, who were supposed to guard such an important place. Carol only sighed sadly and explained. The kingdom was now in a whirlpool of insurmountable difficulties, which no one yet suspected. After these words, the girl quickly felt for a hidden button that opened a secret passage. Ventura looked around in amazement, fascinated by the perfection of the hidden passage, and could not help but wonder if the Queen herself had invented it, and why he had been entrusted with such a weighty secret of the kingdom. Carol replied with calm confidence that during a personal conversation, she had managed to convince Her Majesty of Glenn's reliability and loyalty. Now His Majesty is firmly convinced that this glorious adventure will certainly turn out to be of great benefit. A few minutes later, Glenn and Carol entered the Queen's chambers. The Queen greeted the cat girl with such cordiality that it was obvious that a genuine friendship had already developed between them. Luciana looked at Glenn, and, with a smile, admitted that she was incredibly happy to finally see with her own eyes the man she had heard so much about in enthusiastic stories. Without a moment's hesitation, he turned to Luciana to ask if her appearance was producing the effect she had been promised. Indeed, his attractiveness did not disappoint. Meanwhile, Bland noticed that, despite the significant difference in social status, the two girls were surprisingly close to each other. Luciana confidently stated that Carol is her most loyal friend, whom she trusts unconditionally in any matter. In response, Carol reveals her deepest secrets to her, and between them there will always be a topic for sincere conversation. He admitted that he was pleasantly surprised by the warm welcome, because usually, when meeting new women, he encountered their restraint. The Queen understood well what the adventurer was hinting at, so she explained that as long as the disturbing rumors were circulating around Glenn, the situation would not change. At the same time, Carol remained her faithful advisor, so her words carried considerable weight. Glenn could not hide his surprise. To him, Carol had always seemed the most treacherous and least reliable woman he had ever met. Carol took his words with displeasure, noting that Glenn also trusted her. She recalled how they had dinner together, walked around the city, and talked animatedly during an evening walk to the sea. The special style of communication between Glenn and Carol so amused Queen Luciana that she could not hold back a real explosion of laughter. Her laughter was so sincere and carefree that she herself admitted that she had not felt such joy in a long time. Carol witnessed for the first time how Her Highness laughed so openly and sincerely. Luciana immediately changed her mood to business and urged them not to waste time. The Queen admitted that she was in serious danger. Her husband, the king, had been poisoned. Without a moment's hesitation, she assured everyone of her innocence, insisting that she was in no way involved in the affair. But her close connection with the king has drawn suspicion towards her, and now she is forced to remain under arrest. Glenn noted that, as far as she knew, the Queen had spoken truthfully and had not lied. Later, The brave adventurer asked what information Carol had managed to find out. However, the cat girl only sighed in disappointment and said that so far their investigation had hardly progressed. Someone was extremely skillfully removing all the evidence and carefully covering up the tracks. Finally, before Lysiana, who sat on her throne, he solemnly swore his full cooperation, promising that she could trust him completely. The adventurer's words deeply impressed me. So I asked Glenn if he could help, for Carol's sake. But he immediately firmly emphasized, Carol has nothing to do with it. Her name had no influence on his choice, and she has nothing to do with this matter. He sincerely confessed that he wanted to help the queen, because she was in a difficult situation and had confided in him. These words immediately made Lysiana blush and blush. After that, the adventurer cautiously asked the queen to give way and step aside. Lysiana, although she did not understand at all what was happening, nevertheless obediently fulfilled Glenn's request. Making sure that the queen was out of danger, Glenn decisively struck the crosses where Lysiana had just been. This unexpected action confused and shocked the girls, making them hold their breath. The screen broke in an instant under the pressure of the magical blow. With a loud crack, the chair flew into pieces. Glenn immediately began to carefully examine the fragments of what had recently been a real decoration of the room. Everyone was astonished when Glenn lifted a short man from his chair. The adventurer turned to the queen, asking if she recognized this mysterious stranger. Lysiana did not yet fully understand what was happening around her, but deep down, she felt as if she had seen this man before. She resolutely demanded that the stranger reveal his true nature. However, the mysterious man was not at all embarrassed. On the contrary, he directed his questions to Glenn, trying to find out what role he should play, since he should be near the queen. Lysiana, without a moment's hesitation, intervened in the dialogue and reminded him in a cold voice. She would never allow this. The queen was advised not to delay with her questions, as the real commotion was about to begin. Carol hurried to cover Lysian's ears, as requested, but could not resist joking, "Who will take care of my ears?" In one moment, he bound the stranger with magical chains, and then slowly passed sparks of lightning through his body, trying to extract important information from him. About 10 minutes passed, and the hostage finally lost consciousness. Glenn hurried to calm the girls, explaining that the man was still alive. He had only influenced him a little to make him answer his questions. Carol admitted with bewilderment that she had never in her life even imagined how shrill people could scream and how terrible torture could be. Finally, the stranger introduced himself as Dalm Lubistar and pleaded with them not to use electric shocks on him. Queen Lysiana explained that he was the son of Dalm Lubistar, commander of the first detachment of the Knights of the Royal Guard. Carol, who had never heard of this figure, was genuinely surprised. Why would the queen hide such a man in her chambers, and in great secrecy? The stranger frankly admitted that he had been closely watching the queen, and emphasized that the entire blame for the conspiracy to kill the king lay entirely with the courtiers. He exposed the insidious conspiracy of enemies who deliberately attacked the king first, seeking to save the life of Queen Lysiane. It turned out that this room was practically not visited by servants, so in the event of trouble with the queen, it is unlikely that anyone would find out about it immediately. The treachery of the courtiers struck her to the core. She said with indignation that even in her native walls, Lysiana was now under mortal threat. At this moment, Freyna advised Glenna to reveal the secret of the existence of fairies to Lysiana, because such news could be crucial, both for the investigation and for the protection of the queen herself. I described in detail how these people, sincerely attached to Glenn, would not hesitate to lend a helping hand to her and even her small children in case of danger. The adventurer instantly deciphered Freyna's hidden intention and added with certainty, the main thing here was not her jealousy at all. Varium denied the accusation of jealousy with particular fervor, although her cheeks were flushed and she diligently tried to prove her innocence. Blaine asked the queen to listen to him very carefully, for what he intended to tell was entrusted only to the most trusted and trusted people. Then he asked Lysiane to give her word that what she heard would remain only between them, and she without hesitation promised to keep the revealed secret within the walls of this room. He shared that he had spent the entire past year, while he was away from the capital, in the mysterious and magical world of fairies. Lysiana was shocked by this confession, as she had previously believed that fairies only existed in legends and children's tales. This confirms that all the fairies, along with Chiaman, strive to befriend Carol and Lysiana, and join forces to overcome difficult trials together. She immediately suggested leaving the fairies on guard, as it was a wise decision, especially when the merchants were nearby. After that, the head fairy advised hiding the prisoner, and the surest way to do this was to hide him under. Having taken all necessary precautions, Glenn decided to leave Queen Lysiana alone for a while. As he passed by, he noticed that his computer and Carol were still not showing any signs of life or regaining consciousness. Wishing the tiny fairies to watch over the queen, the adventurer swiftly used teleportation magic and instantly dissolved into thin air, disappearing from Lysiana's chambers. The queen was captivated by this unprecedented event. Something new and unknown awakened in her soul. Taking the oath, she promised to find proof of her innocence and, at any cost, to reveal who was really behind this poisoning. He was deeply moved when he saw Glenn with Carol. He had always believed that the two of them couldn't get along. The adventurer sincerely apologized to the older Silver Knights, as fate had not yet brought them together in common affairs. Meanwhile, Carol told Galeus that Glenn had gratefully accepted her request to help with a difficult task. He replied that usually Carol's unusual side jobs turned out to be a complete failure. So, unfortunately, all that could be done was to sympathize with him. They promised to explain in detail to their subordinates the reasons for Glenn's refusal, sincerely wished him good luck in all his future adventures, and assured him that they were always ready to lend a shoulder in a difficult moment if he needed help. That evening, left alone with Carol, Glenn decided to open his heart and talk about the difficult trials that had forever changed their fate. Venturer asked Carol if she had any idea who might be following them. The girl thought for a moment, then, with a faint recollection in her voice, said that she had seen these boys somewhere before. At the same time, she firmly assured him that they could not be criminals. She was convinced that someone outside was carefully collecting detailed information about them. Carol gently drew the adventurer's attention to how much they had been through together with his previous partner, overcoming many obstacles along the way. Elaine seemed to notice them immediately, as they passed by like a shadow. Someone suggested that it was Glenn's remarkable ability to transform that drew so many curious glances. Freyna agreed with Kat's daughter, adding that Glenn's distinctive eyes were what made him so special. The image of Glenn, once cold and even harsh, now noticeably changed, becoming more open and kind. Carol still found him peculiar and somewhat rude, but she admitted that it had become much easier to find common ground with this eccentric adventurer. He emphasized that he had to be on his guard. It was possible that someone would try to find him. Most likely, it would be his former teammates. Frana advised Oleg not to lose his composure. After all, if Oleg himself had no desire to return to his previous life, even if someone did find him, it would hardly change anything. This adventure made everyone think. The true motives of those who began the search are still shrouded in mystery. At the same time, it seemed unlikely that those mysterious individuals really had something planned in advance. They frankly noted that the best scenario for them would be to remain unnoticed, as no one sought to figure out the intentions of strangers on their own. He decides to find out key details and goes to the estate of Count Louis Starr. And again he was captivated by the incredible speed with which Frayne dissolved into thin air. He wanted to learn the same art. Glenn Grandin carefully noted that Carol had not yet seen his magic with her own eyes, because only then would her amazement be truly genuine. After climbing to the third floor and walking down the long corridor, Glenn finally concluded that Domes' office must be somewhere nearby. Together with Carol, they easily overcame the obstacle of the locked door, and immediately began to study the documents they found with enthusiasm. However, not even a few minutes had passed when quick, confident footsteps could be heard in the corridor, steadily approaching the office. Calmly approaching his desk, he immersed himself in reviewing documents, not even suspecting that three strangers were watching him from behind, skillfully concealing their presence with the help of an invisibility card. The note on the sheet immediately caught Glenn's attention, and as soon as my host learned of the ready breakfast, the mysterious trio instantly disappeared from Dalma's field of vision. He remarked that if the document were true, it would show that the entire nobility of the kingdom was deeply involved in this dark scam. And that was exactly the kind of behavior that was surprisingly typical of you. He thought that news of this nature would finally swallow up even the Queen's slightest hope of salvation. However, next they had to visit the residences of the Duke of Maine, Burdal, and the Minister of Justice. This itinerary somewhat confused Glenn. He knew none of these people intimately. He noted that the Burdali family had long been at enmity with Her Majesty, and this was an indisputable indication of their motive for committing the crime. He could not have imagined that even in the refined circles of the aristocracy, such intense disputes could flare up. Carol also admitted to herself that she had not foreseen how serious the situation would turn out. However, deep down, she believed, if only Glenn was there, everything would definitely be settled. The adventurer solemnly swore to see it through, for he had already taken on this responsibility. Without his determination, justice would remain unattainable, she reminded herself, and her faithful little helpers, whom she could always be proud of and trust. Carol sincerely thanked the great fairy, for she was already convinced that her support would certainly become extremely valuable. Queen Glenn solemnly announced the names of all those involved in the conspiracy against the royal family. After carefully reviewing the list more than once, he asked the adventurer if he was sure that nothing had been overlooked. I will tell you how he, together with the fairies, carefully reviewed all the data, and that is why he was completely convinced of the correctness of his conclusions. She honestly confessed that now she trusted only Glenn. The traveler added that in the whole world there was no one who could equal her in greatness. That is why he firmly considered her the best. In the end, it became known that the royal family was also involved in this terrible conspiracy. Diana beamed with joy at these words, while Glenn apologized profusely for secretly spying on the royal family without telling the queen. Carol was impressed by his sharp mind and dexterity in the spy trade, so she invited him to stay with her squad on a permanent basis. He again contemptuously called her lousy cat and sternly warned her not to even think about any cooperation. He asked sternly, why does Wingland feel such uncontrollable hatred for Carol? The cat girl enthusiastically supported the conversation, exclaiming that she herself had long wanted to know where he got so much anger towards himself. With anger in his eyes, he glanced at Carol and declared that he would not forget to remind her how her actions had ruined his good name. Loudly accusing Carol of spreading rumors about him, he added that this was why so many people hated him. Carol, quietly calming the adventurer, asked him not to attract unnecessary attention, and explained that rumors about Glenn had been circulating long before her appearance. She emphasized that although her mission was limited to gathering information, Carol Glenn's words stirred up a wave of genuine anger. But the cat girl confidently declared that she was only telling the truth, and begged not to be judged for her frankness. Ventura recalled the times when he had been unable to control his emotions, spending endless nights in the arms of women he met. But even if all this was true, the endless boasting about it seemed inappropriate and absurd. Hasayana admitted that she now finally understood Carol's guilt, but emphasized that the most important thing was to maintain friendship and let go of old quarrels. Vlan sincerely asked the queen for forgiveness for not holding back his feelings in the midst of events. Venturer expressed the idea of reporting the results of the investigation directly to the king, hoping that such a step would allow him to retain most of the trust he had gained. Anna said that this task was very difficult now, since she was strictly forbidden to see the king. Freyna advised her to turn to his magical essence, but she herself was not sure whether she would be able to convince the king of her rightness. After a short thought, he suggested that if it was not possible to capture all the criminals together, someone would definitely take advantage of the opportunity and escape. It was stated that there was only one way to reach the king without his approval, but Glenn was to see to it that this path was opened for us. The girl explained that adventurers of the highest rank had the privilege of meeting the king himself in person. Lysiana acknowledged this possibility, but wondered if it was so easy to reach this pinnacle and become the chosen one among all. Explained that Glenn will only need a few days to gain honorary status, and soon the door will open for him, even to the king himself. Ventura honestly admitted that he doesn't want to pretend to be someone he's not, but he promised to give his all to win the SR title. Meeting with the queen. Glenn reached the Silver Knight clan headquarters, where he shared with Gels his impressions of the fascinating conversation with the queen. He was visibly elated, emphasizing that he wanted to achieve the highest rank as soon as possible, as it was of utmost importance to him. After thinking for a moment, he said in surprise, he couldn't believe that Blend finally dared to accept Esray's challenge. The adventurer had no idea that the endless wait for the decisive moment had taken so much strength from him. Glenn explained that it was imperative for him to remain inconspicuous at this time, so it was best to leave the matter to Heleus. The bald young man assured him that he would support him, as he was the leader of the Silver Knights. He presented his friend with some great gear, a special gift for his upcoming promotion. Glenn looked at each item from trash with admiration, amazed by their amazing quality. The ammunition was astonishing in its lightness and convenience, as it was made entirely of dragon skin. He wondered if Gallius was truly certain of his decision, because until recently he had believed that the clan and the Silver Knights deserved only iron. He firmly assured his friend that he would spare nothing for him, and that the armor would certainly be worthy of its owner's high status. However, there was a faint hint of displeasure in his voice. Now Gland had received even better equipment than the clan leader. The adventurer himself, confused by such a remark, embarrassedly admitted that he felt a little embarrassed. Gallius noticed that the village blacksmith had always treated Glenn with great sympathy, so making special armor for such an outstanding hero was a completely natural step. He sincerely thanked all the craftsmen who put in the effort to create this incredible armor, and also expressed special gratitude to Haleus for his caring and friendly attitude. After that, he approached Ludger and asked if there were any interesting things for him to do. After taking a look at Glenn's fresh appearance with an experienced eye, he immediately assigned him a task of the highest difficulty. Without hesitation, Glenn decided to take on all available missions in order to get the desired rank promotion as quickly as possible. Glenn's heart burned with a thirst for a new rank, even though he knew it could be deadly for him right from the start. He disagreed with Gallius's beliefs and confidently assured him that he would complete all the tests twice as fast as expected. He was impressed by such determination, and he asked Luger if the guy always behaved this way. Luger only admitted with a smile that he had long been used to it, because Glenn constantly surprised those around him with his extraordinary talents. I told Haleus that it was not unusual for Oleg to work on 10 orders at once, but this time he would only be able to complete half of them. He admitted that his ideas about the usual order of things had been shaken by Glenn's presence. The first step towards change was a bold and dark maneuver that Glenn had dared to undertake. Ventura noted that this opponent seemed too simple for such an urgent task, but Haleus emphasized that black tactics always manifest themselves differently, adapting their methods to each opponent individually. The adventurer noted that the main threat from the monsters was their extraordinary physical strength. Gallius involuntarily wondered if he would be able to notice anything familiar in these creatures. He reminded Glenn that he had long since become a completely different person, not like the rest, and his ability to use magic independently had always been unique and unusual. It became clear to him, the High Fairy was indeed right and worthy of being remembered. At this moment, the Black Ogre was happily enjoying his lunch, temporarily remaining defenseless. He crept up to his opponent almost invisibly and struck him in the back with a lightning-fast sword. The Black Ogre, not suspecting the trick, writhed in unbearable pain, and Glenn, feeling the advantage, fanned his rage even more. In a few moments, the Black Ogre finally melted into thin air, marking another brilliant victory for Glenn that day. The traveler quickly glanced at the task list and decisively announced, "The next goal is to destroy the nest." He was overwhelmed with delight at his friend's stunning victory, and he confidently said, "Despite all the unpredictability of Glenn, I will never leave him alone with his problems, and will definitely stand by his side." Glenn, faithfully fulfilling his duties, constantly supplied us with rare resources and created excellent working conditions. He explained that as soon as the resources were extracted, they were immediately placed in a magical vault, allowing them to remain absolutely fresh. Ludger could not hide his admiration for this level of skill, and wondered if Glenn had any support from Gallius. However, the bald clan leader admitted with a smile that he could barely keep up with Glenn himself, and had no influence on his work. After that, he suddenly turned to Ludger with a question. "Tell me, how many tasks do you still have to complete to raise your rank?" Such a question caught Ludger by surprise, and he immediately replied, "And why are you so interested in my rating, Glenn?" The adventurer didn't understand why everyone was so surprised, but Ludger reminded him that he himself had never aspired to obtain an S rank, and had said more than once that such fame only attracted excessive attention. He remembered that he had once held a similar opinion himself. But now Gallius wondered whether his comrade would be able to climb the career ladder, whether he would have to prove his skills in practice once again. In response, he noted that Glenn was a skilled adventurer, so he had no doubt that he would successfully pass the trials to advance in rank. Lodger Atas asked to wait a little while to summon the necessary specialist. Glenn was urged not to tell Luger anything. In response, the traveler emphasized that only Hallie knew all the details right now, so it would be wiser to wait and reveal everything at the right time. Later, the charismatic bartender Qualk, the head of the capital's Adventurers Guild, visited Griddith Glen. He responded to Valgan in the same tone, knowing full well that Valgan had been carefully prepared for this meeting. The situation was extremely confusing, so he immediately wondered, Had Glenn really signed a magical agreement with the fair? Tell Glant that the guild leader also had his fairies, although there were significantly fewer of them than he had. It was these fairies, it seems, who informed him of the contract. Glenn was not surprised by this reaction. He did not expect anything else from Bulk, because he quite deservedly occupied the place at the head of the capital guild. He admitted that he barely recognized Glenn. The adventures had become too unpredictable and strange lately. To this, Glenn replied that he dreamed of climbing the career ladder and achieving the title of S-Beam. He assured his comrade that work on the new adventure map was almost complete, so Glenn need not worry about his promotion. He was genuinely surprised, and in disbelief he asked if it was really not necessary to take the exam. Vol just shrugged, admitting that he considered it an unnecessary formality, because for Glenn, the S rank no longer mattered. Ventura expressed his sincere gratitude, emphasizing that it was a great honor for him to feel such trust and recognition of his talents. Volga firmly emphasized that during this time, Glenn had changed radically, and, without any exaggeration, had become even better. Returning from his adventures in the capital, Guild invited Glenn to refresh himself with a drink, and the men became absorbed in conversation, touching on interesting topics. All this time, Gallius had been busy with his friend's exam, so as soon as Glenn appeared, he immediately eagerly inquired about his achievements. Ventura shared that the exam turned out to be much easier than he imagined, and he has now been promoted. Gallius emphasized that achieving a new rank in just one day is a real achievement that Glenn can be very proud of. After a while, Ledger returned, holding a new adventure map in his hands, which immediately stunned Glenn. It was made of an exceptionally rare material, striking in its unusualness and causing genuine admiration. He explained that, according to the laws of India, the use of precious materials had always been a strong temptation for adventurers. But Glenn adamantly replied that enchanted iron was enough for him. Phryne, in turn, advised the traveler not to hold back his joy, for they themselves could not hide their delight after learning of his experience. When he realized that the most important thing had been achieved, he asked when he would have to appear before the king. Ledger replied that such an opportunity would arise immediately after the official announcement of Glenn's promotion at the royal court. He shared that just 2 days after being assigned his new assignment, he received an unexpected invitation. The very next evening, he found himself amidst the shining lights of a gala ball with Queen Kaylee herself. He replied that if there was no other way, he would have to be patient and just wait. However, Hallius noted that for such a meeting it was necessary to get festive clothes, because Glenn would have to appear before the king himself. Glenn honestly admitted that he had not even thought about it, and sincerely thanked his friend for his wise advice. Now the heroes have another goal: to find a talented tailor who could sew a ceremonial suit in the shortest possible time. And just when the bitter smell spread in the air, Lane suddenly appeared and loudly announced that the long-awaited meeting had finally taken place. The encounter with his old abuser did not bring him any joy. Elaine noticed that Glenn had changed completely. Now he was hardly recognizable. The traveler noticed a striking change in Elaine. Now he resembled a cunning dog, which was beyond recognition. The unexpected appearance of the enemy ignited real, genuine feelings in Glenn. Unexpectedly for everyone, Alan spoke conciliatorily and urged Glenn not to reproach his old friend, because there had been many trials and unforgettable memories on their shared path. He loudly, indignantly denied any involvement of Elaine, stating that she had never been his partner. He also angrily admitted that his condition was now so bad that he was forced to ask for support even from the person he had once kicked out of the team. But there was no need to entertain any illusions. There was no one present who could really help him. Fritha immediately asked Glenn to pass on all the important information to you. Now you must find out the cause of the malfunction and finally stop resorting to outdated protection methods. He apologized to the head fairy, explaining that he had been suddenly seized by bitter memories of the past. His gaze fell on a stranger from Alan's team, a girl who immediately stood out with her confident, businesslike appearance. He decided to take advantage of this and involve her in his plans. After conducting a thorough analysis of his past team, Glenn approached Lane with a question about why he had appeared now and whether he intended to bring him back to the group. He honestly admitted that he had really thought about it. But it was with him that the girl who had long wanted to meet Glenn appeared. The dark-haired stranger stepped forward resolutely and declared, "Glenn is the one she was looking for." Carl accused the adventurer of a treacherous attack on her, emphasizing that she was the innocent victim of this daring prank. Carol said that it was Glenn who took advantage of her vulnerability, cruelly humiliating her and sowing meanness and fear in her soul. Glenn reacted to the stranger's words without hesitation. His hand instantly intercepted her movements. Elaine immediately demanded that the woman who had gotten into trouble be released immediately. However, it was at this moment that Frana realized the stranger turned out to be one of the Shadow Snick's subordinates. He reacted to the danger with lightning speed, loudly ordering everyone to move away. The guy firmly declared that this girl was none other than a suspicious thief who should be caught immediately. He noted that Elaine had once again surprised him with her foolishness and cunning. Although, to be honest, he should not have expected anything better from her. How could Elaine allow the real criminal to be in the team? This is an unprecedented shame for the commander. He couldn't help but wonder if Alan would dare to reveal the truth and admit that he had no idea about it. For Alan, this situation was another painful blow. With a flash of anger, he assured that he had no idea about anything, and his face immediately froze, as if petrified. Glant turned to his comrade, urging him to remain calm, and advised him to take control of the situation himself next time. Later, Glenn asked Luger if he had managed to get any information about the thief. However, Luger only shook his head. There was no meaningful conversation. It seemed that the girl had poison with her and had already used it. He explained to Glenn that the poison hadn't yet had time to take full effect, so the girl was alive, and they still had time to talk to her. It was best to pretend they were using healing spells for now. He asked Luzger not to disclose his plans. Together with Frayne, they used magic to bring Brunette back to consciousness. When she woke up, the girl was stunned for a moment, unable to believe her eyes, and managed only one question. Why was she still alive? Bland paid almost no attention to the thief, only calmly asking if she really thought she was the most cunning of all. But the adventurer insisted it was important to her that Bland finally tell him where, according to him, the Viper's den was located. Burnett suddenly burst into a scream, indignantly accusing some cunning swindlers of cheating her. Glenn, however, took her emotions as another performance. He remained steadfast and wondered how to calm this noisy girl. A burst of magical lightning instantly cooled the ardor of the enraged thief. She immediately stopped snapping. Only then did Glenn solemnly declare that the treatment was complete. Ludgren, still shocked, cautiously asked Glenn to warn him about such situations in advance, because he had never heard such loud screams before. Glenn, feeling guilty, sincerely apologized and promised to act more carefully in the future. Although our participation in the organization was quite modest, the most valuable loot was the discovery of a Viper's hideout. This is a remarkable success for the start of our investigation. Even before Glenn joined the investigation, everyone knew only the name Chatos N. It became clear to Ludger that Elaine had apparently found a new safe haven. At the same time, it became clear that this multifaceted man was actually influencing events much more powerfully than they had previously assumed. Thinking about it, he hesitated. Would Glenn risk penetrating the very lair of the Shadow Snakes right away? However, the adventure itself seemed to silently suggest that sometimes it was worth waiting and postponing action until a better opportunity. Glenn emphasized that he had another important matter to take care of first, which also seemed to have something to do with the Shadow Snakes. But for now, all they could do was be patient. Ledger didn't argue, and decided to rely entirely on Glenn. The next piece of advice was to leave this dangerous Laia right here. If his comrades suddenly appeared, we would be able to obtain extremely important information. In the end, he called Glenn a cruelty bordering on inhuman, and admitted that his heart clenched with horror when he had to see how he heartlessly tortured. Ventura agreed with this opinion, admitting that since childhood he had not known what compassion was, so he felt no need to show mercy even to his own enemies. He immediately decided to contact his mentor and report the incident. In response, Glenn mentioned that he knew another person to whom he should tell about this. He said that he had intended to visit his old friend Halius, and suddenly, thanks to magic, he found himself right on the doorstep of his house in an instant. Adventure knocked politely before entering, and the door soon opened for him. In fact, his path led to the Queen's own chambers, and of course, Carol was already waiting for him there. The traveler, with a twinkle in his eye, boasted about his new car for the most daring adventures, and then, full of seriousness, informed her of a matter of exceptional importance. A corrosive rage seized him as he returned to the snake's den. The adventurer, with a tear in his voice, exclaimed that the banished thief had already been found and returned to where he had been banished. Leon's shrill cry rang out as Mr. Duke appeared in the doorway, looking around with curiosity and wondering what was going on. He thought for a moment as Elaine Duke spoke, but quickly came to the conclusion that the adventurers were unlikely to care how tall he was, or where he was. The Queen and Carol studied Glenn's fresh guild card closely, not hiding their genuine surprise at how quickly he had achieved a higher rank. Ventura proudly noted that all his grueling training had finally paid off. In response, Carol only sighed with hidden envy, as she often lacked the determination and inspiration to train regularly. One of the nobles pointed out firmly that, given Glenn's current experience of adventures, it was time to move forward. In response, Glenn confidently assured that they would certainly cope with the Quadras, as well as the Queens and El Vicher. He added that very soon all the guilty would certainly be justly punished. Gallius persistently conveyed the request for reinforcements, as circumstances increasingly demanded more people. The Queen explained in response that it was almost impossible to attract new supporters at this time. However, Blaine confidently assured that he would solve this problem, as he already had several ideas for solving it. Under the protective veil of night, Glenn quietly made his way to his room, left alone with. Fairy asked how Glenn was feeling, but Glenn admitted that he wasn't feeling too well at the moment. I told him that he had always tried to convince himself that his former comrades had fallen under some kind of magic, and that was why they had treated him so cruelly. But in reality, it turned out that his old friends had made their own conscious choices, and were deliberately trying to harm him. He was strongly advised to forget these people forever, unless Glenn himself dreamed of rejoining their company. In the end, the traveler agreed to follow this advice. The memories of his friends and his own prejudices only weighed on his heart and prevented him from moving forward. It had dawned on him that Elaine had never held an important place in his heart, but it was still hard to accept that someone he had known for many years had managed to become so coldly distant, as if turning into a ruthless block of stone. Understanding how difficult Glenn was right now, he advised him to try to sleep. Rest promised to relieve anxiety and bring long-awaited relief. The next morning, Pancake headed to Florida to update his wardrobe before an important trip to the royal castle. It is said that it was Gallius who recommended the visit, given Pancake's recent promotion to the prestigious S rank. Flora warmly congratulated Glenn on such a long-awaited and well-deserved achievement. He was convinced that his unusual clothing order would inspire a new round of development for Flora's trade, and the girl problem team would make every effort to fulfill the order flawlessly. Flora immediately realized that a client of such a high rank would become a real gem for her business, raising the prestige of the business to a new level. The girl promised to choose the best materials for Glenn so that his appearance at the royal palace would be a real event. The traveler responded with gratitude to her words, because she was, without a doubt, a true master in this matter. Surprisingly, this time Glenn and Frayne went straight to the main entrance of the palace, although they usually use secret paths to hide. At the gate, they were met by a guard, who immediately told Glenn that everyone had been waiting for him for a long time. On the eve of the official ceremony, the king decided to personally talk to the adventurer. For Glenn, this came as a complete surprise, but he accepted the honor without hesitation. For several minutes, the man followed him unnoticed, until he stopped in front of a luxurious, incredibly beautiful door. Gravis von Dylan apologized for the untimely, though sincere, request to speak privately. The king, noting the tension in the room, responded with only a slight smile and assured Glenn that today's meeting would be held in a simple, friendly atmosphere, free from official ceremony. Plant, thanking him for the honor of being present, calmly settled into his seat. Without a moment's hesitation, Gravis confessed that he had known about Glenn's alliance with Luciana from the beginning. His frankness made Glenn visibly uneasy, but despite this, he valiantly tried not to lose his composure. He reassured Glenn that there was no need to worry about their conversation, and confessed that he had deliberately left Luciana aside so that she could find true allies for her own safety and development. Then, the adventurer asked, "If that is the case, could not Her Majesty the King suspect the Queen of treason?" He assured me that such a thought had never even crossed his mind, and that if the slightest doubt had crept in, he would have immediately rushed to the other rooms to make sure they were safe. He sought to protect her, planning to hire professional security for this, but, unfortunately, these intentions had already become known. He admitted that he had not expected Glenn to decide to help protect the Queen and capture the conspirators. The king sincerely thanked him for such valuable support, and Glenn replied that he was always ready to come to the aid of his comrades. He said that above all, he wanted to resolve this misunderstanding as quickly as possible and return to a calm, familiar rhythm of his life. That is why, he emphasized, it would be extremely valuable to have an experienced companion by his side, able to support and help him cope with this matter. He wondered if he had been mistaken in thinking that the king himself had truly entrusted him with such an important task. Rebus replied that in reality, the deepest faith was placed in life itself, and Luciana, through her wisdom and foresight, was willing to entrust him with her children. The king and the adventurer were determined to act together to bring the traitors to justice, for this chaos had to be ended as soon as possible. With all official business behind him, Glenn finally returned home, exhausted. Frayne, on the other hand, was delighted with the adventure. He was proud to have been able to show his best side to the representatives of the kingdoms. He turned to the majestic fairy, unsure whether he had managed to convey his thoughts properly, for he felt as if he was constantly choosing the wrong words. But Freyner assured him that everything had gone well, and that there was nothing to worry about. Having finally completed all the adventures, he realized, it is best to immediately unravel this complex confusion, and only then allow himself a real rest. She was immediately enthusiastic about the brilliant idea, and then shared. The local fairies had told her about a picturesque place they would be able to visit after completing their mission. Having listened to the words of the fairies, he zealously insisted on resolving the troubles of the royal family as soon as possible, because everyone had long deserved peace and rest. It was on this day that the history of our kingdom was enriched with a new significant event. The first meeting with Glenn, who from now on joined the ranks of our brave adventurers. In the luxurious chambers of the royal castle, among numerous aristocrats, Glenn solemnly announced, if his reliable sources were to be believed, most of the conspirators had gathered here. Franz supported this opinion and strongly advised to act as cautiously as possible. Near the spacious hall, Glenn was met by an old comrade, Halius. The bald-headed clan leader frankly admitted that he had not expected to meet Glenn here. For him, this appearance was a real surprise, because he had long been accustomed to looking at Glenn as a legendary outcast. He was acting as a security guard at this reception, and it was all thanks to His Majesty. It's a shame that they would have to ruin such a grand event because of this. Ask Halius to warn his men to remain discreet and not attract undue attention. Their primary duty is to ensure that no one leaves the hall at the right moment. I have personally promised to see that all orders are carried out in accordance with the principles of Wish Glen. Afterwards, His Majesty the King solemnly took his place on the throne and called upon everyone to listen attentively to the speech of the chief presenter. Meanwhile, Grabus energetically persuaded those present not to miss a single word of the story of the exciting adventures, insisting on full concentration. Glenn expressed his sincere gratitude to the king for the warm and magnificent reception arranged in his honor, and solemnly assured that he would henceforth devote his exploits and adventures to the service of the monarch. He also solemnly promises to work tirelessly for the prosperity of the entire kingdom, ensuring the safety and well-being of every one of its inhabitants. Suddenly, for everyone gathered, Glenn announced his first task. He intends to conquer the royal trade. Relying on his magical talents, Glenn instantly blocked the path of the suspected traitors, sparking a real panic among everyone present in the hall. The restrained aristocrats tried in vain to escape the trap, but the strong magical chains remained unbreakable to any physical attempts. The adventurers declared that all the aristocrats in chains were involved in a conspiracy against the royal dynasty. As soon as this statement was made, Gallius, without hesitation, ordered his soldiers to immediately capture the traitors. When Glath finally completed the main estate, he appealed to the king to allow him to take up further affairs. In gratitude, Brevis warmly thanked him on behalf of his family for the young adventurer's invaluable contribution to the discovery of the crime. He then asked if Glenn needed support or weapons. However, the young adventurer confidently replied that his equipment was impeccable and he could handle everything else on his own. Having uncovered the insidious plots within the walls of the royal castle, Glenn was overcome with determination. He headed straight for the Shadow Serpent's hideout to complete the task once and for all. It was completely out of character for an experienced adventurer to deal with ordinary gang members first. He sought first and foremost to expose the person behind this entire criminal organization. He immediately recognized the man as the Glen Elaine had mentioned in her stories. Glenn himself, noticing that his dark magic had made no impression on the leader, only strengthened his suspicions. Without a moment's hesitation, he resolutely approached the leader of the gang at Delt Duca. His hand delivered a devastating blow with lightning speed. After that, he firmly declared that he intended to talk to him. Ventura turned decisively to Frayne, intent on seeing the matter through to the end. She appealed to the High Fairy to hand over all the bandits to Haleus, solemnly promising to fulfill this mission. However, deep down, she had doubts. Would Glenn be able to handle everything on his own, without her support? He solemnly promised, everything will fall into place. Now is the time to complete the chosen path. Using the magic of movement, he jumped to the side of his former comrades, who had barely managed to escape the city. At that moment, Glenn was quickly heading towards the castle, hoping to make it in time. But all his intentions were instantly shattered, because the danger was already approaching. Unable to bear the tension, he impatiently turned to Elaine, trying to find out what prompted her to hurry. The former commander was suddenly overcome with fear from such an unexpected encounter, and he was completely confused, not knowing what to do next. Lane ran away because this time even his skillful eloquence could not get him out of trouble. He reminded his old friend, who had been a master at manipulating other people's feelings since childhood, of those glorious days of the past. But now time had taken its toll. The mind, it seemed, no longer served its master so diligently. Not long ago, all the girls from the previous team were adamantly insisting that Glenn leave them alone and finally stop pestering them with his obsessive attempts to get closer to them. None of them even imagined that he could one day become a part of. Ventura admitted that such nonsense was not part of his plans, but he still could not avoid meeting those who had dragged him here. Moreover, his old comrades who had embarked on a criminal path were doomed to invariably pay for their actions. And this payment turned out to be cruel. He drew his sword and loudly declared that he was not involved in any of these cases, while demanding that Glenn immediately stop making baseless accusations. However, Glenn calmly replied that although he had not been personally present during the main events, he had already managed to uncover all the circumstances. Moreover, all the irrefutable evidence is now at the disposal of his former comrades, including this sword. The true owner of this weapon was treacherously deceived and ruthlessly robbed, and his further fate still remains unknown, whether he is still alive or perhaps has already departed to the afterlife. Realizing his helplessness, he resolutely rushed at Glenn with an attack. But Glenn proved to be much stronger. His response was lightning fast and powerful, and he easily deflected the attack. He then resolutely attacked his former allies, inflicting significant losses on the enemy. He shouted indignantly that he was fed up with Glenn getting tangled up under his feet all the time, and now he had taken Emily away from him. He muttered angrily to himself that Glenn had always outdone him in both strength and intelligence. He retorted to his former comrade that it was his jealousy and anger that made him worthless. Fired with anger and moved at the same time, Elaine burst into pleas for mercy. She swore to reveal all her secrets if only she would be spared. Villain explained that if Elaine had truly repented of her actions, she would have had a chance at pardon. Unfortunately, however, her repentance turned out to be false. Venturer hissed fiercely at Elaine, brutally declaring that the time had come to destroy her life, completely erasing him from her world. Hopeless Elaine, along with Adele, desperately begged to save his life, but their fervent pleas could not reach the dead heart. In fact, Glenn didn't take Elaine's life. He only knocked her unconscious with a skillful use of lightning magic. It seems that there was no room for bloody massacres in his plans. Elaine was worth nothing to Glenn, so he wasn't going to waste any effort on her. For a while, the entire team of brave travelers found themselves in the very heart of the Silver Knights clan headquarters. Oleg explained that the cause of their fainting was only a light lightning spell he had used. But before they had time to come to their senses, Haleus, who had not expected such a turn of events, rushed in alarmedly with the question, "Is Glenn all right?" The bald leader of Silver now confessed to his friend that his endless adventures had taken all his strength, and he needed rest. He asked Haleus to finish what he had started, assuring him that he would do everything properly. Finally, he advised his friend to confidently stick to the chosen course. Joyfully welcoming Glenn's return, he immediately asked if everything was okay. Fairy gently hugged the person dearest to her, and sincerely promised to never leave him without her love and support again. Glenn, feeling the warmth of her words, thanked her for her concern and confidently assured her that everything would be fine for them ahead. Venture apologized for the disturbance caused, but most importantly, all the aristocrats responsible for this have already been arrested for their attitude. The news instantly spread throughout the city, and the inhabitants of the capital were astonished to learn of the treacherous betrayal of most of the aristocrats, who, as it turned out, were the real source of all the troubles. In every corner, they discussed how, thanks to Glenn's decisive actions, it was possible to expose and punish those guilty of treason to their state. She asked if Glenn was ready to go to the royal palace. The adventurer felt exhausted. It seemed to him that another audience with the king was unnecessary. But the cat girl patiently explained. According to ancient customs, only true heroes are entitled to special honor, and not in vain, because it was thanks to Glenn that it was possible to bring the traitors to justice and save the country from an insidious threat. She admitted that she couldn't even imagine how a pancake could be worried. However, fate noticed. Everything went as it should until the moment came when she met. Filled with excitement about the upcoming journey, Adventure decided to take care of all the important matters as soon as possible, so that later she could treat herself to a relaxing moment in a cozy bath. At this moment, King Grabus and Queen Lysiana deeply thanked Glenn for his invaluable assistance in solving the difficult case. Venture sincerely admitted that his heart was filled with joy when he saw the king and queen together, because their unity gave hope and upliftment to everyone around. Then came the solemn moment of the awarding. The reward was received not only by the fearless adventurer, but also by those who showed true courage during the fierce battle. It seemed that every detail in the frame had been thought out to the smallest detail. But suddenly the guard made his demand. I wanted to meet Glenn again, but in a calmer atmosphere. That's why I think he should have brought a bodyguard with him. After all, escort is a key element of this game. It's hard to imagine it without this companion. But you, a true adventurer, boldly declared that a bodyguard was not needed. He assured them that he would make it on his own and would not need help. Frano sighed in annoyance, because of this their long-awaited trip to the bathhouse had to be postponed. Finally, Frana stepped into the vast hot springs. The majestic fairy blossomed with delight, feeling the magic of this amazing corner, hidden so close to the city walls. She quietly confessed that she could still hear the echoes of sincere words of gratitude in the air. It was only through teamwork that the crime was solved, and Glenn was upset that he alone received all the praise and credit. Frayne understood his displeasure, but supported his friend, saying that there was nothing shameful in such a situation, and there was no need to worry about such things. Then Fairy honestly admitted that the human world was not as bad as she had previously thought. On the contrary, she increasingly liked the various features and charms of this world. He said that this was thanks to the many fairies who understood perfectly well what a pleasure bathing in hot springs is for true connoisseurs. Moreover, their owner, a desperate adventurer who set out in search of the dreamed-of hot waters, also sincerely appreciated this type of recreation. After all, in his opinion, a person who sincerely adores hot springs cannot be bad. Thanks to the fairy, every moment in the hot water becomes a real pleasure, which wonderfully relieves fatigue and gives a feeling of absolute peace. As soon as he returned to the capital, he immediately met Flora. The adventurer honestly admitted he did not expect to see her just in the middle of the city streets. Glenn said that he intended to visit her after he found a comfortable place to live, but it was Flora who beat him to it. Offering support with an apartment, holding a bunch of keys in her hands, Flora announced with a smile that she had prepared a special surprise for Glenn. She must move on, because fate is already calling her forward. Taking advantage of the adventurer's confusion, she deftly picked him up and resolutely led him along, and in a moment firmly announced their refusal right here and now. He announced that from now on, all the estates would pass into Glenn's possession. And this news flashed through the hall, causing a wave of sincere surprise. Having barely recovered from his initial shock, Glenn wondered why it had taken him so long. He emphasized that a home for a hero of the highest rank should be a worthy embodiment of his glory. Glenn wondered how Flora had managed to prepare such a spectacular event, since he had only been gone for a few days. The girl told him that the incredible miracles were due to a special secret method that allowed buildings to be built literally before his eyes. Glenn was fascinated, because he had never heard of such methods before, and was genuinely surprised by what he heard. An unforgettable event. The door to his own home finally opens, and Flora congratulates Glenn on this special moment with genuine joy. The impressive luxury of the estate's interior stunned the traveler, because he had no idea that so much space and sophisticated splendor was hidden behind the walls. As he gazed at the luxurious bathtub, he instantly imagined himself embarking on an incredible adventure with Glenn. He was so captivated by the wonder that lay ahead that he couldn't even find the words to describe his emotions. She was pleased to note that the day had left Glenn with the best impressions. After that, Venturer asked how much this grandiose building had cost Flora. Plain explained in detail that he had received part of the funds as a royal gift, so he would be able to compensate for the costs of construction. However, Flora, she emphasized that her financial resources remain a trade secret, so Glenn has nothing to worry about. Remember how much effort Glenn put into getting back into the game without losses and regaining his impeccable reputation. That is why he is, without a doubt, worthy of such a valuable award. Venturera's soul was deeply touched by the girl's kindness and care, so he thanked Flora with sincere gratitude for all she had helped him with. He immediately suggested throwing a party for all the members of the Silver Knights clan. Such an event, he believed, would be a great opportunity to get to know each other better and spend time together in a cozy, friendly atmosphere. He immediately jumped on the idea, offering to take on the organizational hassle of sending out invitations. Blaine was also happy to join in the discussion and enthusiastically supported the plan to organize a celebration to mark the victory in conquering his own space. After inspecting his possessions, Glenn set out for Halius to share news of his achievements with his friend. Then his gaze fell on the bulky stack of papers that stood on Halius's desk. He wondered what kind of documentation it was. Sighing with obvious fatigue, Halius suggested that Glenn sort through all the papers himself. As it turned out, all these numerous letters turned out to be offers of work under various contracts, and each of them was addressed specifically to Glenn. For a moment the adventurer froze in surprise, not believing that so much attention could be paid to him. Goliath confirmed that many people wanted to involve Glenn in cooperation, and there were even those who dared to meet in person for negotiations. Now Glenn was faced with the task of choosing for himself with whom and how to proceed with the matter. He confidently stated, "If Glenn decides to join another team, he will accept it, because it is a personal choice, and no one can interfere with the decisions of his comrades." The hero was convinced that the news of his success had already spread around, so new offers of cooperation showered him one after another. However, he immediately emphasized that he had no intention of leaving the Gallius team, because it was here that he felt extremely comfortable, and everything suited him. He defiantly crumpled one of the documents, promising his friend not to leave him a single step. Then he loudly announced an impromptu party at his house, to which he had invited Halius and his entire team. Visibly stunned by the offer, Halius asked if Glenn had been. He solemnly expressed his intention to join the ranks of the Silver Knights, but only if Gallius did not object to this decision. The guy instantly threw himself into his friend's arms and sincerely admitted that right now he felt like the happiest person in the world, and enthusiastically agreed to collaborate with Glenn. There was a question as to whether there would be enough room for all the guests, as the clan numbered over 50. However, Glenn assured him with confidence that everyone would find a cozy corner. The bald leader wondered how huge Glenn's house must be to accommodate so many people. He invited Ledger to his apartment, which impressed the guest with its luxury and spaciousness. Ledger frankly admitted that he had not expected to see such a magnificent residence. After that, he solemnly presented the carefully selected gift and asked if Glenn had been able to get some rest. The traveler reported with a smile that he had visited a wonderful place with a hot spring, where there was complete silence and solitude, which gave true peace. It seems that it was Fred, a passionate fan of hot springs, who advised Glenn to visit this cozy place. His name appears repeatedly in Adventures That Are Gilded, and among the members of the Silver Knights of Halius Club, he enjoys considerable authority. After thinking for a moment, he admitted that he had never seen Fred with Halius, and had no idea that he belonged to the Silver Knights Club. Luger explained that Fred was an avid hot spring seeker, so it was almost impossible to find him in the capital. Exactly where this restless adventurer had fallen into the trap was still unknown. It seemed to him that everything that was happening was nothing more than the mischief of Carol Veloci herself. Suddenly, the figure of a catgirl flashed through the window frame, stealthily trying to sneak in. Glenn gave her a stern look and sternly warned her that if she didn't stop eavesdropping from outside, she would be severely punished. In a moment of carelessness, Carol fell off the windowsill and landed flat on the floor. Glenn only skeptically advised her not to forget about exercise and wondered what had prompted her to make this visit. As he passed by, he stopped to exchange a few words. Glenn had already returned to the capital. As partners, they should have kept in touch. Besides, she would really like Glenn to visit her soon. The adventurer firmly assured that he would never voluntarily set foot on the threshold of Carol's house, because he considered such an adventure to be senseless and too risky. Hearing this, Carol immediately guessed If Glenn was showing interest in Freud, then, most likely, this very adventurer was now within the walls of the royal palace. When he asked the girl how long she had been eavesdropping on his conversation with Ludger, it turned out that Carol had heard every word. After that, the adventurer could not resist asking what exactly Fred, known to everyone as the bath lover, was looking for in the very heart of royal power. The king and queen are currently traveling, and Fred sincerely recommends that they stop at the most picturesque and secluded place. Ludger notes that it seems that Grebus and Leia Lycian have also decided to take advantage of the moment for a break. Having felt the long-awaited security, they have finally allowed themselves to relax a little. Glynn made this possible, but Caroline did not forget to remind her that she also participated in solving the crime. In the evening, Gallius came to us, accompanied by all his subordinates. The bald adventurer was sincerely amazed at Glenn's cleverness. He explained that, as promised, he had brought all the members of his clan with him. After that, Glenn kindly invited them inside. One of the visitors was a young girl named Rick, who treated the other girls with warmth and sincerity, feeling a special sympathy for them. One of the girls presented Glenn with a luxurious bouquet and thanked him from the bottom of her heart for the invitation to his extraordinary home. He reassured Rick, assuring him that everyone felt at home here, and the young girl sincerely explained that her main goal was just to say thank you from the bottom of her heart. He emphasized to her once again, Rick is a passionate admirer of Glenn's, and that's why she joined his clan, hoping to see her with her own eyes one day. Rick, stunned by such unexpected news, asked if she had known about it before. In response, the girl confessed that her passion for Glant dates back to her early childhood. It turns out that once upon a time, a disaster struck Rick's home village. Creepy monsters completely devastated the peaceful streets. But it was thanks to Glenn's courageous intervention that the residents got a chance for salvation. He fought desperately and eventually managed to drive out the menacing enemy. She said that for Glenn, this was just one of many things. But for her and her loved ones, he will forever remain a savior and a true hero. That day, she firmly decided to become a skilled adventurer like Glenn. Soon, Rick left her home and set off for the capital, full of determination. Gallius also said that Rick always rejected the vile gossip about Glenn and tried her best to protect the honor of her lover. Ventura sincerely thanked the young girl for her unwavering faith and support. It was thanks to such bright people that he found the strength to bring the good news again. Making her way through the dense crowd of guests, Carol suddenly stopped and loudly announced that she urgently needed to talk. The young woman seemed extremely agitated, as if consumed by pain and anxiety. Without a second's hesitation, she suddenly burst into a scream, shouting furiously. The adventurer made it clear that she wasn't invited to the party, so she should leave his house immediately. Carol angrily replied that she had much more important things to do right now, and the responsibility for the invitation was entirely his. The girl said that several aristocratic conspirators managed to disappear. Their traces are lost in obscurity. The news was truly incredible, as the dungeons were guarded closely, and it seemed there was no chance of escaping. However, it became known that not only the aristocrats managed to escape, adventurers also broke free with them. Realizing that there was no room for delay, he instructed Flora and Ledger to keep a close eye on the boy. Ledger, sensing that events were getting out of control, promised to take charge of organizing all matters himself. Thanking his friends for their support, he promised to return as soon as possible. Then the hero used the magic of teleportation and set off on his journey to. Later, unexpected details emerged. All but one of Glenn's former team members were present. It all seemed so unusual that the situation seemed more than strange. Inspect the area with special care, or even organize a real raid. She explained that she had barely caught a subtle ringing of magic, and had no doubt. It was spatial magic. This moment seemed the most bizarre in the entire story, because the heavy shackles that entangled the prisoners were supposed to completely immobilize them and suppress any attempt at action. Some of the bars in this cage are covered with spells, so not everyone can break through them. However, the High Elf noted that these restrictions only apply to humans, so it is entirely possible that one of the demons had a hand in the escape. She was deeply shocked by the very idea that demons could participate in the escape. It seemed completely incredible and fantastic to her. Demons approach those whose desire to fulfill their dream has become an obsession, tempting them with promises of incredible power. But the price for such a deal turns out to be too high. In exchange, they take away not just their desire, but something much more precious. Life, or another most precious thing. Demons are skilled at manipulating those who commit crimes for their own gain. Now everything is clear. This is exactly the kind of person Elia was. It was probably he who managed to find contact with the unknown. She admitted that under the circumstances, the line could only have been caused by demonic magic. However, Frana warned her not to jump to conclusions and to investigate everything in detail. It was only a guess. It is possible that Elaine fell under the power of dark forces after making some mysterious deal. Fairies said that conspiring with a demon gives a person access to its exceptional powers, as the body of the possessed person becomes a portal through which the demon penetrates our world and receives its own physical embodiment. They understood that they would not be able to overcome such a challenge on their own, so they had no choice but to turn to. As soon as the adventurer appeared before the king, reporting the disturbing events, Grevis was stunned by the news of the demon. However, the advisors, who had obtained evidence and gathered reliable information, told him that similar escape incidents were occurring throughout the kingdom. Ask Glenn if he thinks all these events are somehow connected. Venture recalled that Elaine, who was on the run, had once been a member of the Shadow Serpent clan. If the other escapees were also members of that organization, it would confirm a strong connection between them. One of the advisors requested permission to address the matter to Glenn, and as expected, he received permission. The consultant turned to the adventurer with genuine interest, wondering how he had managed to sense the presence of a demon. After all, he himself had thoroughly examined the dungeon and had not come across any suspicious traces. At the same time, the man emphasized that he had no intention of questioning Glenn's words, but only wanted to understand the circumstances of this mysterious event in detail. He said that all the misunderstandings were a result of the fact that he was the one who managed to conclude the most contracts with Fairy. His sharp analytical mind allowed him to instantly notice even the smallest traces of demons. Thanks to the thorough explanation, he finally understood the whole chain of events. At this point, Glenn cautiously asked Frana what exactly he should do now. But the fairy, standing her ground, persuasively asked not to mention her involvement for the time being. The advisors asked the adventurer if he had managed to find the shadow snake's lair by the same method. Blaine described in detail how the fairy had tracked down his previous partner, emphasizing that the success was only possible thanks to her cunning. Gravis emphasized, "Protecting the kingdom is more important than prosecuting criminals." Glenn noticed that the holy power was much more powerful in the fight against demons, so he suggested turning to the Holy Land for support. Having accepted the proposed strategy, he immediately ordered a petition for cooperation to be sent to the Holy Land. In addition, he announced a meeting of the holy magicians and ordered them to immediately begin preparations for the search for the demon. At the meeting, the king thanked Glenn wholeheartedly for the valuable information, as it gives him a chance to prepare for the upcoming battle with the demons in the best possible way. The adventurer, in turn, emphasized that the protection of the monarch and the entire country always comes first for him. He confessed that he had long been waiting for calm to finally appear in his kingdom. However, unexpected troubles again disturbed the peace, and now all his hopes were pinned on Glancy. He was genuinely shocked by the news of the demon's appearance, and immediately wondered if Glenn was leaving his clan again. However, the traveler hastened to reassure him, noting that he was unlikely to be involved in this matter. Now it was up to the royal troops to fight the demons. Glenn admitted that he wanted to join the mission, but only if he was allowed to take an active part in it. To this, Halius, without hesitation, promised to support his friend in every way, assuring that he would always be by his side. Together with his subordinates, he solemnly promised to make every effort for the prosperity of the kingdom, emphasizing that they would always stand up for justice. Glenn sincerely thanked his friend for his noble intentions and agreed to join forces for a common goal. After that, Ventura wanted to introduce Gal to his old ally, so he asked Franny to show herself to her. He solemnly introduced the High Fairy, emphasizing that it was thanks to this girl that he had managed to achieve significant success in his investigations, because she had shown herself to be an unsurpassed warrior. Freyna, catching the surprise in his eyes, noted with a smile that they had already had the honor of meeting before. Only now did Galeus realize why his fairies were so frightened. A high-ranking fairy had been with them all this time. Frana, in a friendly way, suggested that they address her simply by her name and sincerely apologized for frightening the unfamiliar fairy. After discussing their next steps, Galeus and Glenn decided it was time to begin training. They called together all members of the Silver Knights to prepare the squad for new challenges. The first to accept this challenge was a boy named Nick, along with the sorceress Nia. Although both had already achieved their own rank, They were eager to expand their skills and master new magic techniques. He willingly undertook to pass on his knowledge to those who were eager to master new techniques, although they still existed. I was warned not to put too much weight on Glenn, as there was just too much to handle. But my trusted friend firmly promised that he would definitely handle it. Venturer admitted that he would gladly take advantage of the short break to communicate more closely with the members of the Silver Knight clan. Glenn responded by emphasizing that his main skill was ball skills, although he could also use magical abilities if necessary. Venturer said that his main weapons are the ability to strengthen his own body and a magic sword. However, he emphasized that mastering the art of strengthening the body requires a lot of time and effort. That is why he wants to pass on the knowledge of wielding magic swords to everyone, because if you have any questions about defense, it's best to contact Galeus. He is truly an unsurpassed specialist in this field. He wondered if mastering the art of wielding a magic sword was really that difficult. Of course, at first, the exercises may seem awkward, but with each training the movements become more confident and precise. Eventually, habits bring them to automatism. Then the whirlwind traveler demonstrated a series of bright tricks with his magic sword, stunning the audience with skill and style. Everyone was also reminded that before starting such training, everyone must have magical power. The adventurer turned to Franna with a request to check if there was anyone in the group who was deprived of this ability. She said that every traveler is born with the gift of feeling and channeling one of the magical elements. Some learn the power of flame, some conquer the power of water, and some find their calling in other elements. She was the first one Rick invited to train with Glenn, and even then the mentor noted her innate talent for this attribute. Did the girl really understand the essence of magic? After a short pause, Rick said that during her studies she had managed to familiarize herself with the methods of strengthening the body and had a general idea of their principle of action. Glenn suggested that she gather her thoughts and carefully repeat each movement after him. In just a few minutes, Rick was able to form a burning ball, which incredibly impressed the girl. Glenn advised her to carefully monitor each step and, when the opportunity arises, persistently practice these actions to perfection. Ventura explained that the wielder, armed with deep magical knowledge, is able not only to keenly analyze the events around him, but also to change his own appearance at will. It is this unique skill that allows him to skillfully wield the powerful magic sword. You will certainly notice that training methods play a key role. It is worth noting that it was the majestic fairy who became the author of this extremely effective method of training. And for this, everyone feels sincere gratitude to her. As a result, our hero adventurer decided to devote himself to teaching others the art of wielding a magic sword, and at the same time, took on the role of a mentor in magic spells. At the end of the story, a mysterious sorceress appears on the scene and becomes the new leader of the group. The students eagerly accept her leadership, understanding the importance of this new mission. The young girl reminded Glenn that she also wanted to train with everyone, on the same rights. Adventure confidently reassured his ally, assuring him that no difficulties would arise. Only 2 weeks have passed, and each of the students has noticeably improved their level and, sparing no effort, has relentlessly immersed themselves in intense training. It was nice to see the results achieved, but for some unknown reason, Halius decided that his students were only working half-heartedly. Glenn explained to his friend that things were completely different. Each student gave their all to the training, and some even stayed after classes to hone their skills to perfection. With a smile, he admitted that he was sincerely jealous of such rich adventures, because he had once had to practice alone. That is why Glenn considers the Silver Knights clan to be truly united and friendly. It is especially emphasized that Glenn himself is part of this clan, a community that is considered the best and friendliest in the world, where absolute freedom and harmony and interaction reign. Suddenly, Nia challenged Glenn to a training match, deciding to show off her entire fighting arsenal. Her idea seemed like a light joke, as if she wanted to divert attention from his role as a mentor. In the end, she still accepted his terms and agreed. Ventura suggested that the girl focus exclusively on attribution magic and physical training, strictly forbidding her from using any other techniques. You willingly accepted this condition and assured him that you would comply with his demand. He took on the duties of referee, solemnly announcing the beginning of the sorceress. Naya had no doubts. The one who would deliver a devastating blow without delay and instantly use the magic stone would win. Frenach stood in amazement, watching the girl cast the spell with incredible speed. She only uttered a single word, and her magical power instantly increased. Frenach had never seen such a spectacle before. He openly admitted that magic was a complete mystery to him, so he relied entirely on the experience and intuition of Glenn and Frayne. Meanwhile, Glenn himself effortlessly and confidently held off all of N'Zoth's attacks. The sorceress exploded with anger, as Glenn skillfully avoided each of her attacks, like a shadow, and confidently repelled the fiercest blows. But the adventurer only shrugged his shoulders. In a real battle, no one willingly puts himself under the enemy's blade. Hearing this, Nia decided not to hold back and released a water spear into battle, while Glenn was already preparing for the next wave of tests. Despite all her efforts, the girl's blows never managed to break through Glenn's protective barrier. Her attacks smashed against the unbreakable shield, remaining useless. Glenn confidently announced the start of the attack, and at that moment Nia realized that she was unable to hold back such an onslaught. Without a second's hesitation, she rushed towards. Several years passed, and the young sorceress suddenly rose into the air, which greatly surprised Haleus. Freyna, noticing his surprise, smiled slightly and noted that this was just a normal consequence of the movement of air currents. He charged from above, hoping to catch his opponent off guard, but Glenn instantly read his every move. It immediately became clear to him that these were the techniques inherent in Aranked Benz's fighting style. Glenn caught the young girl in time, who was furious, saying that the duel was unfair because he had used only one spell. But the experienced traveler calmly reminded her that this was enough for a test. After all, if Neo had not been able to skillfully control her power, during the fight she could easily lose control and give her opponent a chance to break through. The young witch explained that the point was precisely this. Sometimes life requires a lot of courage. But Glenn disagreed with her, warning, "It's so easy to lose your guard and cause trouble, and losing control often ends fatally. Especially if Nia pushes herself to the limit." He did not lose faith, for experience had taught him that Ventura's words and assurances of future progress carried a great deal. It was at this moment, overwhelmed with happiness, that Rick K., her idol, congratulated her wholeheartedly on her brilliant victory. She approached Glenn, full of hopes of learning the art of fencing, as she longed to reveal her abilities to the world. However, Glenn warned her that she should remain calm and stand firm on her feet, without giving in to emotions. After another grueling workout, all the students sincerely thanked Glenn, and the exhausted team set off on their journey. Glenn found Carol in his own house. She was confidently settled in a guest car. She was annoyed by the very appearance of the girl with cat-like features. But Carol assured her that she was just patiently waiting for Glenn to wake up, and had done nothing inappropriate. He suggested contacting Flora with the idea of installing even more artifacts capable of detecting unwanted guests in the house, because he was tired of suffering from Carol's sudden visits. However, the cat girl assured him that she had come for a reason. She had an important assignment. She had to deliver a letter for. The message also requested a personal meeting with Glenn, but he couldn't understand why he had to make things so complicated by instructing Catgirl to deliver the message and assess the situation on her own. Carol advised the traveler to carefully study who actually received the mysterious letter from, because it turned out that it was sent by Saint TLRX himself. This unexpected truth shocked me to the core. While Tialuric finally met her student, whom she had been waiting so eagerly for many years. Today, the Holy Virgin of the Glens once again stepped on the threshold of the capital of the Kingdom of Dua. As soon as he learned of T. Alarex's affairs, Glenn immediately headed to the royal palace. This time, his heart was beating more anxiously than ever before, and the excitement was literally unbearable. The adventurer told Fran that it was simply impossible to remain calm after the incident with the Holy Virgin. In response, the High Fairy calmed him down, emphasizing that this was a matter of extreme state importance and there was no need to worry. The castle servants politely invited Glenn to sit down and be patient. Meanwhile, the traveler curiously asked Frana whether the holy woman was capable of concluding a treaty with Fairies. Frana replied that at the moment there were no obstacles to this. He admitted that he wasn't sure whether he should reveal secrets to Tia about his relationship with Fair. He gently reminded the traveler that this was unlikely to cause serious complications, especially if the Holy Maiden had made a personal pact with the other fairies, knowing Glenn's hidden answer. The adventurer noted that despite the fact that Tia had not done anything wrong this time, one should not lose vigilance. After all, the Holy Maiden and her companions could well turn out to be real crooks. He agreed with Glandus, and it was then that a mysterious figure called him into the room. Once in the room, the traveler was surprised to note the absence of royalty. Here he was met only by a pious girl. Introducing herself as Tia Lurex, She said that she was in the service of the sacred guardianship of the land of Lutichel, and during a private conversation it was enough to address her simply by name. Bland politely replied, calling himself a traveler of these lands, and sincerely expressing his joy at meeting her. He did not hide his surprise when he came across the girls' warm laughter and casually asked what had made them so happy. Tia, a little embarrassed, hastened to apologize for her violent reaction. She explained that, faced with such an unusual sight, she simply could not control her emotions. Then, full of curiosity, he asked how exactly the client managed to cure his... She shared a memory of a time when she visited the Adventurers Guild long ago. Even with her unique gift of healing, she was unable to fix Glenn's head injury. She only wondered if it was even possible to cure such a serious illness. Glenn appreciated her attentiveness and thoughtfully pondered the goal they had set for themselves. Tia noticed another detail: the traveler's eyes, which seemed to be borrowed from another, unknown soul. Fran was struck by his insight. In his gaze there was an ability to discern the deepest secrets, and she realized that it was simply impossible to hide anything from this man. Invite the traveler to sit down, for an interesting conversation full of extraordinary tales awaits them. Meanwhile, Freyna addresses Glenn, urging him to share details about his fairies and tell of his own adventures with them. He immediately turned to the Holy Virgin with a request to keep every detail of their subsequent conversation a secret. Without a moment's hesitation, she sincerely promised to keep everything a secret. Without wasting a moment of conversation, the adventurer rushed headlong to his favorite fairy, who had unexpectedly appeared next to Franny. X, full of delight, honestly admitted that it was the first time in her life she had met a fairy, almost as tall as a human. Frana and Mimia immediately rushed to reassure the guest, assuring her that she had nothing to worry about. She quickly apologized for her outburst, but Glenn reassured her, saying that such a reaction was completely understandable. Frane's appearance was truly impressive. He said that she immediately felt a powerful surge of magical energy, but she could not understand where it came from. Blaine was genuinely surprised, because he was convinced that Tia would definitely notice a trace of such sorcery. The holy girl confessed. She had always felt the unsurpassed power that lies within fairies, especially when she looked into Glenn's striking green eyes. The adventurer and his fairy wondered about Tia's behavior, so they decided to find out what was hidden behind her actions. What plans did she really have? She noticed Glenn's growing anxiety, and to reassure him, she assured him once again that no one would overhear their conversation. Afterwards, the holy girl recalled how a recent incident had terribly damaged his head, leaving painful echoes in its wake. However, Blinn insisted that the past be left behind. Don't forget to give credit to the High Fairy. Her amazing ability to heal bodies was a real salvation for someone who was already teetering on the edge of life and death. It fell to me to explain that this is what distinguishes fairies from mere mortals. After all, if humans were to learn to master the magic of resurrection, the consequences could be truly terrible. He only managed to make a deal because the power to heal people is an extremely rare talent, so stories like this should be treated with special caution. He then suggested considering a recent incident, and also noted that recently magical protective barriers had begun to be erected over all major cities. He only noted that the protective magic had reached truly incredible heights. Now it only takes a few minutes to raise a magical shield over the capital in case of a threat. Frana could not hide her admiration for such power, and realized that in 9 years Tia had fully earned the honorable name Saint. He asked what specific measures of retaliation the Holy Land was preparing. Tia frankly admitted that so far they had not found an effective way to combat demons, but work on its creation was continuing without stopping. At that moment, it became clear that all the activity was about controlling the protective barriers. At the same time, Tia sincerely thanked the adventurer for his indomitable perseverance, thanks to which the insidious presence of demonic forces was revealed. The Holy Virgin embarrassedly admitted. Her memory had failed her in something truly important. She had forgotten something extremely essential, and now she had to share it. One of the companions expressed a desire to speak with Glenn. Glenn readily agreed, curiously asking with whom he had the honor of speaking. Carol insisted that they meet as soon as possible, and noted that her companion on this journey was the legendary magician Merlin. Glenn greeted the esteemed wizard warmly, not yet realizing what this unexpected conversation would lead to. Merlin was asked why he had suddenly appeared in this kingdom. Although he had repeatedly emphasized that these lands did not concern him at all, the man said that he had spent a long time away from the capital, but finally decided to return. His student had important matters to attend to, so he was left alone and decided to have fun, looking for new experiences. Glenn was struck by an unexpected discovery. Teal Lyrics, as it turned out, was a student of Merlin himself. It was a real shock to realize this. One of the people present asked the adventurer if he really didn't go to brothels in the evenings anymore. Many of their mutual acquaintances were already missing his company, so another interlocutor immediately interrupted him, warning him not to talk nonsense or bring up unnecessary topics. This adventure reminded the wizard of his long-standing intention to settle in the werewolf realm. However, Merlin frankly admitted that he quickly reconsidered his plans and hastily left these gloomy, inhospitable lands. Later, he noticed the rapid changes in the development of events and began to watch the situation warily. However, Glenn was not at all happy about such close attention. He had no strength left for this, because he was completely exhausted and could not fully maintain a conversation. Turning his gaze to Frayne, he solemnly declared that it was a real honor for him to meet such an outstanding carrier. Frayne immediately succumbed to the enchanting atmosphere of this meeting. Proving his mastery of the art of compliment, he called Merlin an exceptionally pleasant person. This exciting adventure posed a surprising question to the heroes. Had the famous Merlin appeared to reveal the secrets of demonic powers? The wizard admitted that he had never encountered demons before, but now he was eager to test himself in this dangerous battle. Glenn expressed his sincere gratitude to him. Despite all his shortcomings, Merlin had proven to be a truly indispensable support and a possessor of great power. As it turned out, no one had ever encountered the demons before. They had disappeared from sight for a while. This greatly upset Berlin. His burning desire to join the battle and begin the extermination of the demons remained unfulfilled. Tia remarked to the teacher that demons were a formidable threat, and they should not be underestimated. The meeting came to an end, and they decided to meet again soon. That same day, Merlin visited Glenn's home, and the visit turned into a real adventure. The wizard examined the house with keen curiosity, and, after a brief inspection, noticed that a mysterious illusion had been cast over the dwelling, making it almost impossible for the uninitiated to find Glenn's dwell. Ventura continued to welcome the guest into his home and admitted without hesitation that few could match Merlin's mastery of magic. The magician said that he ended up here solely thanks to Glenn's recommendation, without which it would have been impossible to get here. The magician remarked that Glenn had changed considerably since they had last seen each other. However, the adventurer assured him with a smile that he had done nothing extraordinary to attract the attention of the illustrious wizard Merlin. In response, the great magician asked with keen interest whether Glenn was not traveling alone, but with someone who deserved even more attention than a mere eminent personality. Venturer frankly revealed that he was accompanied by a whole flock of small fairies, about 500 in number. Such an incredible number allowed him to gain the support of fairies of all elements and conclude an alliance with them, so he was able to freely change the properties of his magic. Hearing this, Merlin was so amazed that he could not hide his surprise. Blizzard offered Glenn the chance to become his apprentice, but Glenn politely declined. Merlin was angered by the refusal, and with his usual pride he once again declared himself the most powerful wizard in the world. Glenn calmly replied that studying with Frayne was already of special value to him. He realized that he was beyond the power of competing with the High Fairy, but Frayne insisted. Glenn must turn to Merlin for wisdom. I explained everything thoroughly. She didn't have real human magic. This opened up a wonderful opportunity for Glenn to learn something new. The traveler decided to join only for France, although he immediately made it clear that spending time with Merlin did not appeal to him at all. After that, Glenn went for a walk to where they had stayed for the night. Merle suggested that they should find a place where their conversation would not be overheard. Ventura wondered what exactly the great wizard intended to teach him and how it related to the contracts he had made with Fairy. However, Merle only reminded him with a smile about the need to be patient. In fact, he felt real envy for the adventurers, because his magical talent allowed him to masterfully wield a sword even in the fiercest battles. He shared that he had been harboring this idea for a long time and dreamed of endowing the weapon with powerful magic. However, he himself had never had the opportunity to master the art of wielding a sword. Therefore, Gland could become a real support for him in this matter. He only needed to listen carefully to the instructions. Then he began to cast a spell and created a small magical ball that slowly rose into the air. Suddenly the ball exploded with a furious acceleration and flew rapidly towards the forest, uprooting trees and leaving a desolate path in its wake. Merlin explained that this was the result of all the elements exerting their power, concentrating near you. If this technique was combined with the magic of the magic sword, the destruction would be much greater. However, Glenn noted that if this combination were used against demons a second time, its power would be significantly reduced. Although it was not said openly, it seemed that this was the reason he chose the sword, because it made controlling magical power much easier. The great sorcerer declared this magic to be the most powerful of all his arts. He claimed that if combined with the legendary sword, Glenn would be able to become the most famous swordsman in the world. This thought so impressed the adventurer that he decided to collect all the magical artifacts himself. While frying the pancakes, he repeated the ritual of forming the United Magic Ball over and over again, which caused sincere admiration and amazement, even in the great magician himself. He couldn't believe his eyes. It had taken him half a century of hard work to achieve such mastery, and Glenn had mastered the art on his first try. The great magician, striving to reach the truth, asked the last question and turned to the brave traveler. Can you, using your own magic, combine all the elements into one? After numerous futile attempts, Glenn finally exhausted himself in his search for a way to combine magic with his own energy. It turned out that everything was much more complicated than expected. Merlin explained that although his magical power activated on its own, he still had not learned to harmoniously combine all the necessary elements with his weapon. Whenever he tried to keep the magical flow under control, it constantly crumbled, not yielding to stabilization. Try to merge them together again, but it's worth thinking about control for just a moment, and the magical flow immediately disappears, disintegrating without a trace. He admitted that due to the lack of a magic ball, he could not give clear instructions on further actions. However, Glenn did not allow himself to despair. As common sense and theory suggested, everything should go successfully. The main thing is to skillfully control the flows of magic and not disturb their fragile balance. The next morning, my friend unexpectedly joined our adventure. Rick, as always, shone with inexhaustible energy and charged everyone around him with his cheerfulness. Other students gathered around him, each of whom was burning with the desire to train side by side with the outstanding master. She arrived at dawn, saying she had to deliver some important papers to Hell. The head of the Silver Knights clan was so immersed in endless paperwork that he completely lost track of time and space, so much so that he didn't even notice Glenn's visit. Venture said he stood in that room for hours until Gallius finally agreed to go to training. Although regular practice has helped him find his way to the gym without any problems, he still finds it difficult to navigate the documents. The course of events led Glenn to the idea. It was time to arrange a practice match for the team. He accepted the deal with pleasure, but full of curiosity, asked what their competition would consist of. Gallius did not make himself wait with his answer. You, he said, and immediately issued a challenge. A duel with swords. The proposal aroused sincere admiration in all who watched this scene. It was decided to use only practice swords for the duel, with magic strictly prohibited to keep the battle fair. But as soon as this was mentioned, the adventurer suddenly burst out laughing, which surprised Gallius quite a bit. Glenn could barely contain his laughter, but he gathered his thoughts and suggested starting a new day. The referee confidently enters the arena and loudly proclaims, "The fight has begun." As predicted, Glenn faced stiff resistance from Gallius and his associates. Line did not retreat and tirelessly advanced, overcome by a burning desire to show his comrade how true S-level adventurers perceive the world. Glenn stunned everyone with his lightning-fast mobility. His sudden backhand strike put Gallius in a corner, leaving him no chance to defend himself. The announcement of the end of the duel was made instantly, leaving both travelers powerless. Blaine admired Gallius's steadfast defense, while his bald opponent did not hide his surprise. He had not expected to be unable to cope with the unstoppable flow of bloody blows. He said that he always struck with full force, because he was used to relying only on himself, and that was what always led him to victory. He wondered why Glenn had been so tense lately, and whether he was hiding some problems. The past flashed in his memory. They had once been friends. So he opened up to Glenn, ready to listen carefully, and if possible, lend a helping hand in resolving any difficulties. He was filled with indescribable delight. Meeting a friend and the long-awaited advice from the always impudent Gally became a real source of joy for him. Another training session began. Glenn persistently searched for a way to fill his sword with the power of a single magic, but all his efforts were shattered by a wall of failure. In the end, he realized that perhaps the solution lay in the silence of reflection. So Glenn focused on calm meditation, hoping that in this way he would find a new approach and finally open the way to victory. she was surprised to find the adventurer in deep meditation. He looked completely calm, as if immersed in his own world. Curious, she turned to him. "What has captivated you so much?" He admitted that it was not easy for him to master the new technique, and now he was making every effort to concentrate. Franna was surprised, because before everything came almost effortlessly to this adventurer. Now, for the first time, she saw him having to face real difficulties. I patiently explained that everyone makes mistakes, and that Glenn would succeed if he didn't give up. He thanked me profusely for my support, then returned to his meditation with concentration. 800 minutes passed, and finally Rick appeared. He was glowing with happiness, full of excitement about the upcoming meeting with his idol. The girl demonstrated her latest magic sword technique to Blandis and asked for his opinion. The experienced traveler carefully assessed her skill, praised Rika, and noted that with a little refinement, she could become a true swordswoman. She admitted that she had long dreamed of mastering the art of lightning, just like her easygoing and slightly lazy Glenn skillfully manages to do. However, her natural talent did not allow her to conquer this element. Realizing her limitations, the girl decided not to argue with fate and directed her efforts to reveal other talents inherent in her. It was confirmed that Rick had been training hard every day, relentlessly honing his skills and achieving notable results in both magical arts and swordsmanship. Gallius clearly noticed his memories of the beginning of his journey in this unfamiliar world. The students also did not forget to sincerely thank Glenn's team for their help. Suddenly, a massive boar leapt out of the dark heart of the forest, and with a powerful blow knocked Glenn off his feet. Gallius, without wasting a second, ordered the newcomers to immediately retreat and move to another position. At the same time, Rick, without a moment's hesitation, rushed towards the monstrous animal, resolutely accepting the challenge. Overwhelmed by anxiety for young Rick, and realizing his own powerlessness to change anything, Glenn finds determination at a crucial moment. He decides to unite all the magical elements a second time, remembering the wise advice of the girls, to focus on his own strengths. The adventure sought to enhance the flow of the other three elements, thereby maintaining harmony and supporting overall balance. Finally, Glenn managed to control himself and channel the unstoppable flow of magic through the blade of his sword. Using this power, he delivered a decisive blow that instantly shattered the giant monster. A stunning victory that shook everyone around. He was happy with his victory, because most importantly, no one was harmed during this unexpected lunar strike. Despite her apology for her actions, Glenn, on the contrary, sincerely thanks the girl for her courage, and adds that he owes Rick the opportunity to see this with his own eyes. He was asked about the unique technique his partner demonstrated, because the power of this technique truly impressed everyone. Asked the brave traveler if he noticed anything unusual about the wild boar, and Glenn would admit with a hint of alarm in his voice. His worst fears had unfortunately come true. Indeed, the demonic mark was clearly visible on this formidable beast. They realized that this monster had been deliberately sent upon them by someone else's will. Franna advised the adventurer to reveal all the details of the Holy Virgin as soon as possible, because the demons had already come dangerously close to the castle. Having accepted the wise advice of the majestic fairies, he suddenly felt how time was inexorably melting away. There was almost no time left. The Shadow Serpent's senior demons studied Elaine closely, and after careful evaluation, they concluded that despite his apparent magical power, he was an ordinary adventurer. His spells were impressive, but his personality was nothing special. Disappointed in Elaine's actions, they decided not to waste time, and turned him into an obedient puppet to use him for their own purposes. Despite all the demon's tricks, Elaine stubbornly resisted the magic of the Dark Forge, not succumbing to its power. I was pleasantly surprised to hear that Glenn had already mastered the art of the magic sword after. He was filled with excitement over his adventures and his own achievements, because now he could confidently do things even without the help of magic. After that, he skillfully demonstrated how to neutralize the attack of even an even stronger enemy, and this convincingly confirmed his extraordinary power. Franna admitted that her magical defense barely survived Glenn's blow, and therefore his skill in wielding a magic sword is rightfully considered the most powerful in the entire world. With sadness in his voice, he admitted, Glenn had finally managed to fulfill his cherished dream. But the traveler did not give despair a chance to prevail, and encouraged the great magician, urging him not to give up. In response, Glenn shared disturbing news. They had discovered a demonic mark on a wild boar, an eerie sign of the demons approaching the very coast. From the first seconds it was clear. the monster attacked the entire team. At that moment, Tia clearly realized her miscalculations and promised that there would be no more weak links in her magical barrier. At this time, Merlin, having completed a short investigation, returned with the news. He had not found any traces of shadow snakes in the capital. Most likely, they had already left the city or were skillfully hiding somewhere nearby. However, Freyna emphasized that their enemy, who had entered into an alliance with the demons, had become many times more dangerous. Demons are usually trapped by their own passions and find particular pleasure in sowing fear in human souls. It is this unpredictable thirst that makes the future actions of the evil one almost impossible to predict. To make matters worse, the problem was also complicated by the fact that it was the only thing that remained without any doubt was absolute certainty in everything. Reacting nervously to Carol's unexpected appearance, he reproachfully asked how long she intended to come to him without an invitation. But Catgirl immediately assured him that she had come not of her own free will, but of necessity, and reminded him that each of her visits had brought him considerable benefit. She confidently announced that she had managed to uncover the location of the secret shadow hideout. Finally, he mentioned that, thanks to the coordinated cooperation and support of the royal court, the main investigation had rapidly gained momentum. The main task now is to allow the Holy Maiden to focus on strengthening the magical barrier, while Merlin goes on a reconnaissance mission to find out what events are unfolding in the neighboring lands. Meanwhile, he decided to join Carol in searching for the mysterious Shadow's hideout, which, before starting his business, the traveler visited Flora. She noted with a slight smile that it was their first meeting in a long time, but the hero did not hesitate and quickly got to the point. Laura also noted that it was Hallis and Luger who told her about Glenn's tireless pursuit of knowledge and his enthusiastic immersion in learning. Glenn asked Flora to let him use the artifact to communicate. The girl was surprised. He restored contact so easily, as if it were a normal thing for him. The adventurer explained that using magic to communicate could give away his location to enemies. Flora Glenn, without hesitation, once again intervened in the risky business and promised to activate the communication artifact as soon as possible. So, together with Carol, I set off for the coastal city of Habgam, in the heart of which lay the mysterious lair of the Shadow Serpents. The port city was surprisingly crowded. However, Carol still led us to a nondescript, seemingly ordinary building that hid the secret headquarters of the Shadow Serpents within its walls. He pondered how to organize the interrogation of the suspects and came to the conclusion that the time had come to release the little fairies on a mission. However, it was extremely difficult to predict how the demon would meet such an army of fairies. Glenn Carroll decided to ambush the demon because he couldn't let it show up unexpectedly. He had to make the monster lose its guard, otherwise it would simply disappear into the shadows. I was struck by their courage. The demons had chosen a hiding place right in the heart of a human anthill, amidst the bustling crowd. Obviously, these creatures relied on their dark power, which, at any moment, could carry them away from the threat with a single swing. It's worth being alert. Enemies can disappear into thin air at any moment. The doors to the House of Wishes swung open, and at first glance, unremarkable people appeared on the threshold. It turned out that he was a real drunkard, carefreely whistling familiar melodies, and tirelessly reaching for wine all the way. To Glenn, such frivolity seemed extremely suspicious. High Fairy reported that she felt a powerful surge of demonic energy inside the building, which made her instantly decide on further actions. Without any hesitation, Oleg and Carol exchanged a brief glance, and, having reached a complete understanding, unanimously rushed into the attack. Resolutely breaking down the door, they rushed inside the building, not wasting a second for reflection. Chaos ensued, but Glenn quickly took control of the situation. He subdued the exposed bandits, demonstrating the power of his powerful blood. She rushed after the adventurer and with exceptional agility used her trademark swift technique, Cat. In just a matter of minutes, all the enemies fell unconscious, and the room was reduced to ruins. Suddenly, one of the robbers, hiding in the shadows behind the wall, rushed at the traveler from behind. However, Frana managed to warn him at the last moment, saving her companion from a treacherous blow. The opponent fell to the ground with a thud, and a powerful wave of demonic energy immediately shot out from under his body. Carol quickly tied up the prisoners, and Frano realized with surprise she had hoped for much greater support from the rulers. Suddenly, a powerful wave of mysterious magical energy swept through the world. A possessed man in a black cloak flashed across the room for just a moment, then vanished as if dissolving into thin air. But Glenn managed to instantly teleport after him, never giving up on his attempts to catch the mysterious stranger. The first one stays behind to keep a close eye on the captain. I set out in pursuit of the possessed man, determined to expose his true nature. The demon-possessed fugitive constantly tried to break free, repeatedly using teleportation to leave the territory controlled by this man. Glenn finally managed to catch up with the enemy, and he made every effort to finally prevent the body of the possessed man from returning to where it usually was. The possessed man fought fiercely to the last, until the harbingers of an unforgettable journey appeared on the horizon. Glenn carefully chose the moment to distract his overly hot-tempered opponent and strike him with lightning magic, paralyzing the enemy by surprise. However, possessed by a demon, gripped by an otherworldly force, the man continued to writhe and utter eerie, piercing screams. Under the mysterious moonlight, Glant recognized the familiar features of the shrouded man's face, but at first he could not believe the truth of his words. Ventura assured that if Alain had been a completely innocent person, he would not hesitate for a second and would rush to save her. But now, under these circumstances, he hesitates. I reminded him again that the road to the line was forever closed to him, and therefore his only role in this game was to die. It was at this moment that the key figures of the Shadow Snakes came to the fore, and their mocking laughter interrupted a poignant moment for Glenn and Elaine. Once united by true friendship, they now have only deep enmity between them. He asked if he had already seen the main leaders of the Shadow Snakes. The man in black burst into mocking laughter, and, speaking through his gaiety, suggested that the adventurer see for himself very soon. The demon rushed at Glenn, but the adventurer instantly raised his magic shield, and he realized that by mastering a new magical technique, he would be able to easily defeat demons. However, along with this confidence came the realization that using this power could have fatal consequences for the nearby city. It was at this time that Frana appeared, joyfully announcing that she had managed to brilliantly defend the port city. He confidently expected that he would now be able to use the magic sword technique without any difficulty and deal with the demonic dangers once and for all. However, the demon himself was genuinely stunned by the unexpected appearance of an influential person. Glenn noticed that this creature was not just a powerful fairy, but a harbinger of severe punishment for demons who dared to brazenly penetrate the human world. The demoness smiled slyly and replied that she was quite fascinated by the idea of mastering the mysterious magic that this foolish woman possessed. Without a second's hesitation, he decided to quench the young demoness's thirst once and for all. With an instant flash of magic, a lightning strike, he directed his power at the treacherous sorceress, and in an instant sent her soul into the realm of shadows. Realizing the full threat, she instantly plunged into the green thicket of the forest while Glenn, having already defeated the demoness, remained stunned. He could not understand how his magic sword had withstood such a devastating blow, the tremendous power of which was difficult to imagine. Barely realizing that he had found himself in a deadly trap, he immediately activated teleportation and instantly dissolved into thin air, leaving the demon unharmed. He realized he was in the middle of an S-level adventure, and it fueled his desire to adorn the city gates with Glenn's head. However, Elaine advised her master not to waste his energy on revenge, but to focus on the complex affairs of the royal family and the rest of the aristocrats. Agreeing with Alan, he decided to get serious and prepare as best he could for the upcoming test. A clash with demons. Glenn rushed to his comrade Gallius and, excitedly, shared the news. His legendary sword had lost its power after using the ancient magic blade technique. I firmly promised to immediately find all the necessary materials for writing a new book. He emphasized that it was necessary to find materials of exceptional strength, capable of withstanding the colossal pressure of magical energy. Luger considered the challenge and agreed that it would be an incredibly difficult task. Ledger carefully read several documents, then confidently declared that he seemed to have found a way to solve this problem. It turned out that all it took was to defeat the Mithril Dragon, and the heroes would have the opportunity to obtain an extremely strong and valuable material. This dragon could not be harmed by any magical spells, and therefore, by possessing its body, they would have a chance to forge a sword capable of resisting even the strongest magic. It's important to understand that this monster is incredibly rare, so tracking it down is a real challenge. That's why any raw material obtained from it instantly becomes a coveted prey and is wildly popular. He suggested looking for alternative ways to solve the problem. But Glenn stubbornly stood his ground. He was determined to find the Mithril Drag. Ventura confidently assured that, while this extremely rare creature has not yet disappeared from the world, He will definitely discover it. Climbing out the window, Glenn used his gift of clairvoyance to instantly calculate the dragon's location. After just a few minutes of diligent searching, the adventurer happily announced that he had found the mithril dragon's lair. He announced that a deadly threat hung over the entire kingdom, so there was no time to delay. He rushed headlong into the search for the elusive monster. Gallius could not help but admire the courage and unwavering determination of his friends.